the silver medicine spoon, trembled before Lady Christabel Sparrowfield ever saw the house that had become her prison by marriage. It lay inside a small morocco case upon her lap, wrapped beside 2 glass vials and a folded paper of instructions from Dr. Hargreaves in London, and with every jolt of the carriage wheels over the northern road, it gave a faint, accusing chime. Christabel pressed one gloved hand over the case to silence it. The movement drew the Duke's eyes from the rain-blurred window opposite her. Reynold Fane, Duke of Norbury, had spoken fewer than 20 sentences since they left London, and most of those had been addressed to servants, ostlers, or the driver. His face in the grey carriage light was not cruel. Cruelty would have been easier to understand. It was composed, distant, and disciplined into something colder than dislike. It was the expression of a man who had made a duty into a wall and placed his new wife carefully on the other side. "Is the medicine needed?" he asked. Christabel removed her hand from the case. "Not yet." Dr. Hargreaves was particular. So was my mother, and I survived many of her instructions. His gaze sharpened slightly, as if he had not expected wit from a woman whose marriage settlements had described her health in more detail than her character. "You should not treat weakness lightly." "I don't. I only object when others treat it as my entire person." The carriage fell silent again. Outside, late April rain combed the Yorkshire moors into silver lines. Norbury Hall appeared near dusk, rising beyond iron gates and leafless elms, vast enough to impress a county and dark enough to chill one. No torches burned at the gate lodge. No lamps shone in the upper windows. The drive curved toward a facade of wet stone where ivy clung like old mourning crape. Christabel had been raised among houses that valued appearance above comfort, but even her father's neglected rooms had managed the pretense of welcome. Norbury Hall did not pretend, it waited. The carriage stopped before the main steps. No footman hurried out. The driver climbed down and knocked. Rain pattered on the roof. Christabel looked once at Reynold. He had gone very still. That, she noticed before she could stop noticing, was not indifference. It was recognition. After a long moment, the great door opened, and an elderly butler stood framed in dim candlelight, his powdered hair slightly disordered. His expression caught between horror and obedience. "Your Grace." Reynold stepped down first, Mr. Tebb. "We were not informed your Graces would arrive before Thursday." Christabel heard the small intake of breath from her maid, Alice Hart, in the second carriage behind them. Reynold's mouth tightened. "Today is Tuesday." "Yes, your Grace." Then someone failed to read a letter. "Or someone read it too carefully," Christabel said softly. Reynold turned back, and for one suspended instant, she thought he might ask what she meant. Instead, he offered his hand to help her descend, then stopped before his fingers reached hers, as if remembering too late that courtesy could resemble intimacy. Christabel placed one hand on the carriage door and stepped down herself. The gravel swayed beneath her feet. The journey, the cold, and the medicine she had refused since morning pressed at her lungs. But she straightened before any servant could decide. The new Duchess was already collapsing. Inside, Norbury Hall smelled of damp stone, extinguished fires, and lavender long since dried into dust. A single branch of candles burned on a side table. Shadows filled the corners of the entrance hall. Portraits looked down from blackened frames, stern men in robes and pale women with hands folded as if all of them had learned silence before death. A woman in dark wool hurried from a passage with a ring of keys at her waist. The keys struck one another with every step, a cold little music of possession. Mrs. Glover, Reynolds said, her Grace will require fires in her rooms at once. The housekeeper curtsied, her gaze moving over Christabel's face, the thinness at her wrists, the medicine case in her hand. Of course, Your Grace. We had prepared the east guest chamber. The Duchess is not a guest, Christabel said. Mrs. Glover looked up, startled. Reynolds did too. The words had not been loud, but they had entered the hall as cleanly as a struck bell. Christabel inclined her head with perfect politeness. I am sure the error was only one of haste. Mrs. Glover's cheeks coloured. Yes, Your Grace. Reynolds' eyes remained on Christabel for a breath too long. The blue apartments, he said. The housekeeper's hand moved instinctively to the keys. They have not been used since Michaelmas. Then they can be opened. A servant behind Mr. Tebb whispered something Christabel could not catch. Another answered more clearly than intended. Poor thing. Christabel did not turn. Pity was a draught more bitter than any tonic. She set the morocco case on the hall table and removed her gloves slowly, buying time for the trembling in her fingers to pass. Mrs. Glover, after breakfast tomorrow, I shall need the household, inventory book, the current servant list, the coal account, and a record of which rooms are in use. Rain tapped against the fanlight above the door. No one moved. The housekeeper glanced at Reynolds, not at Christabel. That glance told Christabel more than any account book could have done. The Duchess's title had entered Norbury Hall. Her authority had not. Reynolds said, Mrs. Glover will provide what is required. Thank you, Christabel said, though the thanks were not for obedience. They were for evidence. A cough rose before she could suppress it. She turned slightly, covering her mouth with her handkerchief. The sound was not violent, only dry and humiliatingly public. The medicine case shifted on the table as her sleeve brushed it, and the silver spoon inside chimed once more. Reynolds' hand moved. Again, he stopped before touching her. You should take the tonic. When I am seated. Dr. Hargreaves said regularity matters. So does warmth. His jaw tightened, but he did not answer. From the inner corridor came the sound of another door opening. A gentleman stepped into the edge of the candlelight. Smooth-faced, silver-haired, and dressed with the sober elegance of a man who never hurried because other people had been taught to wait. Your Grace, he said to Reynolds, bowing. I did not expect the honor of your arrival tonight. Nor did the household apparently, Reynolds replied. Sir Neville Brant, Her Grace the Duchess of Norbury. Sir Neville turned to Christabel with concern so polished it reflected nothing. Your Grace, the journey must have been trying. A lady in delicate health should not be greeted by cold rooms. Nor should any lady, Christabel said. Delicate or not, his smile did not change. Quite. She saw then how the house worked. Mrs. Glover held the keys. Mr. Tebb held the old loyalty. Sir Neville held the language, concern, delicacy, quiet. Each word was soft enough to hide a lock. Reynolds removed his wet gloves. Sir Neville has assisted with estate matters during my absence from the north. How fortunate, Christabel said. Then the ledgers should be orderly. For the first time, Sir Neville's gaze cooled, only for a heartbeat. Then he bowed again. Entirely, Your Grace. The blue apartments were colder than the entrance hall. Alice arrived with travelling bags and a face full of questions she was too well trained to ask. Mrs. Glover directed maids to light fires, but the hearth smoked before it caught, as if even the chimney had forgotten use. Christabel sat because standing was no longer wise, not because anyone had won. Mrs. Glover poured the tonic before asking. I shall do that, Christabel said. It is no trouble, Your Grace. I said I shall do it. The housekeeper set the vial down. Christabel measured the dose with the silver spoon. The liquid looked as it had in London, dark amber and harmless. Yet the smell was stronger here, more bitter beneath the sweetness. She hesitated only a moment before swallowing. The taste clung to her tongue like burnt herbs. Later, when Alice brushed out her hair, a faint key turned somewhere beyond the wall. Not the door to Christabel's chamber. Farther away. Deeper. Alice froze. That'll be the west wing. Why is it locked? Alice's eyes met hers in the glass. They say no one goes there. Not since the last Duchess died. Christabel looked toward the wall where the sound had vanished. Reynolds's mother, then. The woman no one had mentioned during the marriage negotiations. The woman whose rooms had become a corridor of silence. Before dawn, Christabel woke to carriage wheels. She rose and reached the window in time to see lantern light moving below. Reynolds stood beside a travelling carriage in his greatcoat, speaking with Sir Neville. His face was lifted toward the house, toward the blue apartments, toward the room where his wife stood unseen behind cold glass. For one foolish second, she thought he might look long enough to stay. He did not. When she descended, wrapped in a shawl over her dressing gown, because ceremony had already failed them, he was in the entrance hall with gloves in hand. Sir Neville stood near the study door. Mrs. Glover waited beside the stairs, keys at her waist. "Business in London cannot be delayed," Reynolds said. "Sir Neville will see that household matters are not burdensome until your strength improves." There it was, the wall made polite. Christabel held the banister until the carved wood steadied beneath her fingers. "Will my letters leave the house?" Sir Neville's pleasant expression did not move. Reynolds looked at her sharply. "Of course." "Then I shall write. You should rest. I intend to learn what kind of house I am resting in." Something crossed his face then, too quick to name. Regret, perhaps, or irritation at being seen too clearly. "Mrs. Glover will provide what you need." "No," Christabel said. "Mrs. Glover will provide what the Duchess of Norbury requires." The title hung between them, not as vanity, but as a door she refused to let others close. Reynolds bowed. It was slight, formal, and not enough. "Until my return." He left before the hall fire had been lit. The door closed. The carriage rolled away into rain and grey morning. No one spoke until the sound faded. Then Christabel turned to Mrs. Glover, whose keys gave their cold little warning as she shifted. "The servant list after breakfast," Christabel said, "and the coal account before noon." Mrs. Glover curtsied. "Yes, Your Grace." Above them, somewhere beyond the locked west wing, the old house settled with a long, secretive sigh. Christabel picked up her medicine case from the hall table, feeling the small weight of the silver spoon within it, and understood that Norbury Hall was not empty, after all. It was full of things no one wished to open. The first morning of Risnal's absence began with cold light, bitter medicine, and the discovery that the silver spoon had changed while Christabel slept. She found it on the small tray beside the bed, laid neatly upon folded linen by some hand too careful to be accidental, its narrow bowl catching the pale wash of dawn from the blue apartment windows. At first, she thought the discoloration was only shadow. Then she lifted it and saw a faint grey line clinging along the silver where the tonic had rested, a dull stain that had not been there in London. Christabel sat very still. Her breath was shallow from the stairs she had climbed too proudly the night before, and her mouth still held the burnt herb bitterness of the dose Mrs. Glover had tried to pour for her. She did not call Alice at once. She wrapped the spoon in a clean square of linen, placed it inside the Morocco medicine case beside the 2 glass vials, and Dr. Hargreaves folded instructions, then locked the case in the lower drawer of her writing table beneath a stack of shawls. Only after the key had turned did she allow herself to cough. Alice entered at the sound, her cap ribbons hastily tied, and her face creased with worry. "Your Grace, you shouldn't be out of bed. I am beside it, not out of it. That's a distinction made by ladies who mean to be difficult. Then I shall try to make it useful." Christabel rose slowly, one hand on the writing table until the room steadied. The hearth had burned low, because the maid had not been ordered to replenish it before dawn. A duchess could be surrounded by bell ropes and still freeze if the household believed her too delicate to ring them. "Help me dress." Alice's mouth tightened. "His Grace said you should rest. His Grace is in London. Mrs. Glover will say the same. Mrs. Glover has keys. I have a title. Today we shall learn which one opens more doors." She chose a plain, dark morning gown, not because it flattered her, but because it would endure dust, kitchen smoke, and disapproval. The stairs punished her before she reached the landing. Halfway down the servants' staircase, her breath caught in that humiliating way illness had of making the body public before the mind had consented. Alice reached for her. Christabel lifted one finger. "Wait." She counted 5 slow breaths, then another 5. The wall beside her smelled of old plaster and coal damp. Below, voices moved through the kitchen corridor, low and hurried. "Now," she said, and continued. The kitchen was colder than any room with ovens had a right to be. One small fire struggled beneath a blackened range, while 2 maids worked with reddened hands near a table where yesterday's bread had been sliced thin enough to make economy look like discipline. Mrs. Pike, the cook, turned from a basin with flour on her sleeves and alarm in her eyes. A girl no older than 14 stood near the scullery door, carrying a coal bucket almost too heavy for her narrow arms. Her dress was thin at the elbows. Her stockings were darned into exhaustion. Everyone curtsied at once except the girl, who nearly dropped the bucket trying. "Your Grace," Mrs. Pike said, "we didn't expect you below." "So I have been told in many forms since I arrived." Christabel looked at the range. "Is this the morning fire?" Mrs. Pike's gaze went to Mrs. Glover, who had appeared in the doorway as if keys could hear rebellion from 3 passages away. Sir Neville advised economies until His Grace reviewed the quarter. "I asked about the fire, not Sir Neville," Mrs. Pike swallowed. "It is all we were allowed, Your Grace." The little maid's fingers had gone white around the coal bucket. Christabel took off the shawl from her own shoulders and placed it around the girl's. "Your name?" "Nell Sowerby, Your Grace." "Nell Sowerby, set down that bucket before it takes your arms with it." Nell obeyed, blinking as the shawl slipped warm over her shoulders. Mrs. Glover stepped forward. "Your Grace, that shawl is fine wool. Then it is well suited to its purpose. The underservants are accustomed to the kitchen cold." Christabel turned to her. No human being is improved by being accustomed to neglect. The words were quiet, but the kitchen heard them. Mrs. Pike's floury hands stilled. Alice, standing behind Christabel, made a small sound that might have been pride if she had dared let it grow. Christabel walked to the range and held one hand near the weak flame. Heat licked at her palm, insufficient and resentful. "Build this fire properly. The servants' hall fire as well. Coal is to be taken from any reception room not in use." Mrs. Glover's keys chimed. "Sir Neville keeps the coal account. Then he will have something warm to read." The housekeeper's face closed, but she curtsied. "As Your Grace commands." and breakfast for the under-servants before the scraps turn cold. Economy that wastes bodies is not economy. The effort of speaking pressed pain behind Christabel's ribs. She sat in the nearest chair before anyone could force one upon her, turning necessity into decision. Mrs. Glover, the servant list. Mrs. Pike, the kitchen account. Alice, paper. By noon, the house had begun revealing itself in columns and omissions. Christabel took possession of a small estate room off the north passage, where dust lay thick on the ledge, and petitions had been tied with blue tape as if neatness could disguise abandonment. The servant list arrived first, carried by Mrs. Glover, with the expression of a woman surrendering a weapon hilt first. Mr. Tebb, Mrs. Glover, Mrs. Pike, Alice Hart, Nell Sowerby, 2 footmen, where 4 had once been kept, 3 housemaids where 6 had served, a still-room maid dismissed last winter, and an under-gardener unpaid for 6 weeks. Christabel copied each name in a new household book. Her hand shook by the time she reached the gardeners, but she did not stop. "Who authorized the dismissals?" she asked. Mrs. Glover stood near the door. "Sir Neville advised reductions." "Did His Grace sign them?" "His Grace trusts Sir Neville in estate matters." "That is not an answer." The housekeeper's eyes lowered. "I have not seen His Grace's signature on every paper." "Then, from this hour, nothing is dismissed, sold, locked, ordered, or withheld without entry in this book and my knowledge." A bridge petition came next, then a widow's roof complaint dated January, then a note from the rector about chapel curtains ruined by damp. Across several papers, Sir Neville's neat memorandum appeared again and again. Unnecessary expenditures to be deferred. Christabel held the widow's petition until the ink blurred, not with tears, with fatigue. Rain in a bedchamber was not an abstract economy. Cold kitchens were not a column. A rotting chapel curtain was not merely fabric, but a signal that even God's room had been expected to wait for permission. She took up her pen. Coal from West Reception stores to kitchen and servants' hall. Pin money to be advanced for flannel, mending wool, and lamp oil. Widow Arkwright's roof to be inspected before week's end. Chapel curtains to be washed, mended, and rehung if salvageable. Under gardener to receive partial wages before Saturday. Alice bent near her. "Your hand, your grace." "It is attached to a stubborn woman. It is trembling. Then it understands the urgency." The arrival of Dr. Hailwood was announced in the late afternoon, and with him came the smell of wet wool, road mud, and honest unease. He was a local physician with a brown coat, tired eyes, and the manner of a man who preferred facts to aristocratic comfort. He bowed to Christabel in the estate room rather than insisting she return upstairs. That earned him 1 point before he opened his bag. "His Grace requested I call if your Grace required attendance. His Grace is more efficient in absence than in presence." Dr. Hailwood looked as though he wisely chose not to hear that. He asked about appetite, sleep, breath, fever, and the London tonic. Alice brought the medicine tray. Mrs. Glover appeared without being summoned. Christabel noticed. So did the physician. He lifted the vial, uncorked it, and held it near his nose. The change in his face was small but real. "How long have you taken this mixture?" "Since London. It tasted altered after my arrival." "Altered how?" "More bitter. Heavier beneath the sweetness." Mrs. Glover said, "The bottle has been kept exactly as sent." "Has it?" Christabel asked. The housekeeper went still. Dr. Hailwood recorked the vial. "I would like to see the spoon used to measure it. It is in my room." Christabel kept her face mild. "I will have it sent later. Do not clean it first. That confirmed enough to chill the room." "No," she said, "I will not." He looked at her more carefully then, as if seeing not an invalid duchess, but a woman already keeping evidence. Until I know more, take only half the prescribed dose, and only after food. If the taste changes again, send for me. Mrs. Glover's gaze flicked toward the tray. Christabel closed the household book. Mrs. Glover, doctor. Hailwood is to be admitted whenever he calls. Sir Neville usually reviews outside visits. Sir Neville may review the weather if it pleases him, not my physician. The day ended in the dining room, where one place had been set at a long table that could have hosted 20. Someone, perhaps out of guilt, had placed wildflowers in a chipped porcelain vase near her plate. Christabel ate enough soup to make Alice stop worrying aloud, then went to the blue sitting room and wrote to Reynolds. She did not plead. She wrote of coal, staff reductions, unpaid wages, tenant petitions, chapel curtains, unanswered household economies, Dr. Hailwood's concern, and the altered taste of the tonic. She paused before adding the spoon. Not yet. A hidden object was sometimes safer before anyone knew it mattered. She signed, "Your Grace, I will do what I can here until you return." Then she sanded the paper, sealed it herself, and rang for Mr. Tebb. The butler came with a salver and a face too old for easy lies. Christabel placed the letter upon it. "This is for His Grace. I wish to be told when it leaves the house." His fingers tightened beneath the silver tray. "Yes, Your Grace." "Mr. Tebb." He looked up. "I am not asking whether it is convenient." A tremor moved through his expression, quickly mastered. "No, Your Grace." When he had gone, Christabel unlocked the lower drawer. The morocco case lay where she had left it. Inside, wrapped in linen, the silver spoon held its faint grey stain like a secret learning how to speak. She locked it away again. Downstairs, the kitchen fire cracked through the evening silence, stronger than it had been that morning. For the first time since her arrival, Norbury Hall sounded faintly less like a tomb. By the fourth morning of Reynolds' absence, Christabel had learned that a house could lie without speaking. Norbury Hall did it through trays placed too carefully, doors opened too late, fires built only after orders had cooled into resentment, and letters that vanished into the proper places without ever reaching the road. She wrote her second letter to the Duke after Dr. Hailwood's visit, describing the missing kitchen coal in firmer detail and asking whether he knew who supplied the household medicines. She sealed it herself. Mr. Tebb carried it away on a salver with the same solemn face he had worn for the first. On the fifth morning, with rain dragging pale lines down the estate room windows, she wrote a third. It was shorter, because her hand trembled from copying wage accounts until midnight, and because the tonic, though reduced to half a dose after food, still left a bitter weight beneath her ribs. "Your house is colder than your letter suggested," she wrote. Then she paused, hating the small crack of feeling in that sentence, and added, "but not beyond repair." She sealed that one too. No reply came, no acknowledgement, no folded note in Reynolds' square hand, no message from London saying he had received her concerns and dismissed them. Silence would have been easier to bear if it had belonged to him, honestly. But on the sixth morning, while standing behind the screen near the service passage, because her breath had failed halfway, between the blue apartments and the estate room, Christabel saw the village groom leave with the postbag strapped behind his saddle. Trade bills, Mrs. Glover's market list, and 2 letters from Sir Neville's office had been entered in the small dispatch book Mr. Tebb held. Christabel's own seal was nowhere upon the pile. She said nothing then. Silence, she was discovering, could be useful when borrowed briefly from those who abused it. After breakfast, she summoned Mr. Tebb to the estate room and dismissed Alice with a glance gentle enough to keep the maid from arguing. The old butler stood before the desk, hands clasped, eyes fixed not on Christabel but on the folded household book near her elbow. "Mr. Tebb," she said, "I have written 3 letters to His Grace. Yes, Your Grace. Have any of them left Norbury Hall?" The question entered the room so plainly that there was nowhere for courtesy to hide. His mouth worked once. "I placed them where outgoing correspondence is gathered." That was not my question. He looked older in the grey light. "Sir Neville reviews all letters likely to distress His Grace." Likely to distress him, or likely to inform him? Mr. Tebb closed his eyes briefly. "Your Grace, I have served this house since before His Grace was born." "Then you know when service becomes fear." That struck him harder than accusation would have done. His gaze moved, unwillingly, to the right-hand drawer of the estate desk, the drawer Sir Neville used whenever he came from the Dower Lodge. Christabel saw the movement and understood. "The key," she said. "I don't have it." "No, Mrs. Glover does." The housekeeper arrived 10 minutes later with her key ring at her waist and defence already arranged upon her face. "Your Grace, Sir Neville's private papers cannot be disturbed without his permission." Christabel sat upright, though her back ached from the effort. Before her lay the servant list, the coal account, the widow's roof petition, the chapel note, and 3 fresh sheets of blank paper. Sir Neville is not Duke of Norbury. His Grace entrusted business to him. His Grace entrusted his name to me. Mrs. Glover's fingers closed around the keys. "I must think of my position." "So must I." Christabel let the words settle. She did not raise her voice. A raised voice would allow them to call her agitated. "I am not asking you to choose between masters. I am asking whether this house has a duchess only when she is too ill to object." The housekeeper went very still. Something moved through her expression. Fear first, then anger so old it might not have belonged entirely to Christabel's situation. At last she removed a small iron key and laid it upon the desk. "The drawer on the right, Your Grace." Christabel opened it herself. Her 3 letters lay beneath a green-tied account book. All 3 had been opened. The seals were broken cleanly, almost respectfully, which somehow made the trespass worse. Beside the first, Sir Neville had written in pencil, "Exaggerated feminine alarm." Beside the second, "Hysterical suspicion." Beside the third, the one written when fatigue had made each word cost something, he had marked, "Useful if needed." Christabel touched that last phrase with one finger, then withdrew her hand as if the paper had become unclean. "Useful," she said. Mr. Tebb made a low sound. Mrs. Glover turned pale enough for guilt to show through discipline. Christabel folded the letters and placed them in a separate stack. "From this hour, the post-bag will be sealed in my presence. Every item sent from this house will be entered in the dispatch book. Mr. Tebb will carry the bag to the groom himself. If Sir Neville objects, he may object in writing, and I will preserve that too," Mrs. Glover whispered. "He will be angry. I have noticed that anger often appears when a door formerly used in secret is locked." Before noon, the drawer yielded more than letters. Behind the green-tied book lay a thin household ledger marked Interior Economies. Christabel compared it against the kitchen account Mrs. Pike had produced with reluctant courage, coal charged at winter rate. Half delivered, wages recorded as paid. 6 weeks withheld from the undergardener. Chapel curtains entered as mended 2 years before, though Christabel had seen their damp rotted hems with her own eyes. Widow Arkwright's roof marked inspected in January. No mason had been sent. The fraud was almost polite in its neatness. It did not shout. It arranged suffering into columns and trusted no one important would look closely enough to hear the cold inside them. Christabel copied 4 entries before her hand cramped. Alice returned and took one look at her face. "Your Grace, please stop. After this line, you said that 3 lines ago. Then I am consistent." But when she stood, the room tilted. Mr. Tebb stepped forward, then stopped, afraid to presume. Christabel gripped the desk until her sight cleared. "Send for Dr. Hailwood." He came in the wet afternoon, and this time Christabel had the morocco case ready. Alice brought it from the lower drawer of the writing table under Christabel's instruction, and set it on the estate desk. Christabel unwrapped the silver spoon herself. The grey stain had deepened along the bowl, dull against the old brightness. Dr. Hailwood held it near the window and smelled it without touching the stained place. His expression closed into professional caution. "Do not allow this to be cleaned. That is the 2nd time you have said so." "It is the 2nd time I have had reason. Could the tonic make weakness worse?" He hesitated. "I cannot accuse without more. But the odor is wrong and the stain is wrong. Keep the spoon locked. Take no dose unless I have seen the bottle." Mrs. Glover, standing by the door, said too quickly, "The bottle is in her Grace's room." Alice went upstairs and returned with frightened eyes. "It's gone, Your Grace. There's a fresh bottle on the tray, but not the old one." No one spoke for several seconds. Christabel looked at the spoon, then at Sir Neville's notes on her stolen letters. Medicine, correspondence, accounts, all of them quiet methods, all of them useful if needed. That evening, after Dr. Hailwood departed and Mrs. Glover had been ordered to admit him without Sir Neville's review, Christabel took one lamp and walked to the carved screen before the west wing. Alice followed as far as the corridor and begged in a whisper, "Don't go alone. I am not going far. That's what people say before they do." Christabel almost smiled, then handed the maid the household book. "If I fall, make certain I fall with my notes in order." The west wing passage smelled of dust, extinguished lavender, and a cold too old to belong to weather. Most doors remained locked, but one narrow anteroom yielded to a key. Mrs. Glover had surrendered after a silence that said she feared the room more than Christabel did. Inside stood a tall, covered portrait. Christabel drew the cloth aside. Eleanor Fane, Duchess of Norbury, looked back in faded blue silk, beautiful, watchful, and unsmiling. A small brass plate carried her name, Reynolds's mother, the last Duchess. At the frame's lower edge, a sprig of lavender tied with old blue thread had been tucked out of sight. Christabel did not touch it. She knew the difference between evidence and sorrow, and this was not yet evidence. Behind her, a floorboard creaked. Mr. Tebb stood in the passage with his candle held low. "Forgive me, Your Grace. I feared you might be unwell, or feared I might find something." He bowed his head. "Both." Christabel covered the portrait only halfway, leaving Eleanor's painted eyes visible above the cloth. "Tell me only what is yours to tell." His voice was rough. Her Grace was ill a long while. The old Duke did not like illness in sight, and this wing closed after she died. By grief. Mr. Tebb looked toward the locked door at the far end. By grief first, then by convenience. That answer followed Christabel back to the estate room, where she wrote her 4th letter by lamplight. She did not mention the spoon by name. She did not accuse without proof. She wrote of intercepted letters, altered accounts, vanished medicine, and the West Wing. Then she added the line that cost her more than the rest. "Your Grace, I do not ask you to believe me, because I am your wife. I ask you to come home, because something in your house has learned to survive without truth." At dawn, she stood beside Mr. Tebb while the post-bag was sealed. Mrs. Glover entered the letter in the dispatch book. The groom took it with the market orders. From an upper window, unseen, Sir Neville Brant watched the bag leave, with his face as smooth as untouched paper. 2 days later, in a private room above a coaching inn north of Doncaster, Reynold fain broke the seal of his wife's 4th letter, and read it twice before the rain on the glass stopped sounding like weather and began sounding like warning. Reynold Fane did not sleep after reading his wife's 4th letter. He sat in the private room above the coaching inn north of Doncaster, with his travelling cloak still damp at the shoulders. The candle burned low, and the paper spread flat beneath his hand, as if it might change if he looked away too long. It did not, Your Grace. I do not ask you to believe me, because I am your wife. I ask you to come home, because something in your house has learned to survive without truth. Beneath that line, Christabel had written of opened correspondence, altered accounts, vanished medicine, and a West Wing whose silence had outlived the last Duchess. She had not begged. That was what unsettled him most. A frightened woman might have pleaded for rescue. A vain woman might have demanded attention. Christabel had done neither. She had arranged facts with a trembling dignity so controlled that Reynold could almost see the cost of each sentence. Mr. Tebb's packet, delivered 2 days earlier to his London house, and then forwarded along the road when Reynold had already left the city, lay open beside it. Inside were the 3 letters that should have reached him first, all broken from their seals before his hand had touched them. On one margin, Sir Neville had written, "Exaggerated feminine alarm." On another, "Hysterical suspicion." On the shortest, cruelest in its use of her fatigue, useful if needed. Reynold read that phrase until it ceased to be pencil and became indictment. He remembered Christabel in the entrance hall, on the morning he left, pale and steady on the staircase, asking whether her letters would leave the house. He had answered yes, because he had wanted the world to remain obedient to his name after he had removed himself from the labor of deserving it. The shame came later than anger, which was typical of shame. Anger always arrived first, because it still believed itself useful. He rang for the innkeeper before dawn. "Fresh horses." The man glanced toward the rain on the window. "Roads are soft, Your Grace. It'll be heavy going north. Then give me horses strong enough for the roads. At first light? Now." By the time Norbury Hall rose beyond its wet elms. The following evening, Reynold had spent a day inside the rattle of carriage wheels and the harder noise of memory. He expected darkness. He had left darkness behind him. It would have been fitting, almost merciful, to return to the same cold facade and find his failure preserved in stone. Instead, light shone from the lower windows, not festive light, not the arrogant blaze of a London house receiving company, a warmer thing. Kitchen firelight glowed amber through misted casements. A lamp burned in the entrance hall, where there had been only a reluctant branch of candles. Along the east passage, another light moved behind chapel glass, paused, and steadied as if someone had set it down with care. Reynold pulled the check string before the carriage reached the steps. The coachman slowed in confusion. Reynold stepped down into damp gravel without waiting for a footman. For a moment he stood in the soft rain and looked at his own house as if it had become a language he had never learned to read. The front door opened. Mr. Tebb stood beneath the portico, his back bent, his face drawn. and his eyes clearer than they had been when Reynold last saw him. "Your Grace." The greeting held more than obedience. Reynold heard it. "Have you come to undo the harm, or only to observe it?" He removed his hat. "Where is her Grace?" "In the chapel passage, Your Grace." "At this hour?" "The tenant's children brought primroses for the sill this afternoon. Her Grace said the chapel should not look ashamed to receive them." Reynold looked toward the faint glow beyond the east wall. Something tightened beneath his ribs. "And her health?" "She tires, Mr. Tebb said carefully. "She does not stop merely because she tires." That answer could have been criticism of Christabel. It was not. Reynold entered the hall and saw at once that Norbury had altered in ways no steward's report could have measured. The broken umbrella stand had been mended. The fire in the great hearth was real, not ornamental. The air no longer smelled wholly of damp. On the console beneath his grandfather's portrait stood a chipped blue bowl of early flowers, absurdly tender under that painted disapproval. A young scullery maid crossed with folded linen, then froze. Reynold recognized the grey wool stockings beneath her plain skirt because Christabel had written the girl's name. Nell Sowerby requires wool before more silver polish. He had read the line in London with irritation because it seemed too small for ducal correspondence. Now the girl looked at him not as a servant fearing rank, but as a creature afraid he might take warmth away because warmth had arrived in his absence. "Nell," Mr. Tebb murmured, "mind your step." The maid curtsied, nearly losing a towel from the stack. "Your Grace?" Reynold turned to the butler. "How many servants have been restored to wages?" "One under gardener, paid in part." "Stillroom work returned 3 days a week. Full restoration waits on account review." Her Grace said honest books must come before generous promises. The shame deepened, steadier now. "And Sir Neville?" "At the Dower Lodge. He comes daily." "Do not send for him yet." "No, Your Grace." Reynold walked toward the chapel passage, past walls he had once crossed without seeing. Tonight every change accused him because every improvement had required his wife to rise from illness and ask what he had not. The corridor smelled of lamp oil, damp stone, and clean linen. Voices came from within the chapel, soft and practical. Then Christabel's voice, lower from fatigue but unmistakably composed. "Higher on the left, if you please, not to hide the stain, to frame it until the plaster can be repaired. We needn't pretend damage isn't there." Reynold stopped before the doorway. She stood beneath the narrow arch, one hand holding folded curtain cloth, the other braced discreetly on the end of a pew. Her dove-grey gown was plain. Her face was paler than it had been on the day he left. Shadows lay beneath her eyes. Every measured breath looked earned. Yet the maids around her did not watch a failing invalid. They waited for instruction. Alice Hart stood close enough to help and far enough away to respect the decision. On the sill behind them, crooked primroses brightened a cracked bowl. Christabel looked up. The chapel altered around the silence. She gave him a curtsy so correct it might have been performed before a bishop. "Your Grace, we had not expected you before winter." The words struck exactly because they were not excessive. One maid lowered her head. Alice's mouth tightened. Reynold stepped inside. "Nor, I think, had I." "Then the roads must have been persuasive." "Your letter was." Her fingers shifted on the curtain. Only then did his gaze drop to the small morocco case, half hidden on the pew beside her. The edge of folded linen showed near its latch. She saw him notice. Her hand moved at once, closing the case with quiet precision. Not guilt, possession. She did not trust him with a spoon. He had given her cause not to trust him with a house. He looked from the case back to her face. "May I speak with you privately, if you are willing?" The question moved through the room more sharply than an order would have done. Christabel was silent long enough to make permission visibly hers. "Alice may remain just beyond the door." "Of course," Reynolds said. The maid and the others withdrew. He waited until their steps faded into the passage, then said, "I received the letters. All of them. The 3 Sir Neville kept from me, and the 4th. Then you know my private correspondence was opened? Yes, read. Yes, judged useful." His jaw tightened. "Yes." She looked toward the cleaned chapel curtains rather than at him. "Norbury Hall is efficient in its cruelties. I left it room to be." That brought her gaze back. It was not forgiveness that entered her eyes. It was attention, and attention from Christabel felt more exacting than anger. "Is that why you came back? Because guilt made good horses necessary?" "Partly. He would not lie to make himself noble. Anger brought me out of London. Guilt kept me on the road. Your letter did the rest." "My letter?" "It did not ask for rescue. It asked for truth." She looked down at the curtain in her hand. "Truth is less likely to come when invited politely." "Then I will stop waiting for invitation." The words were almost too quick, and she heard it. Her chin lifted. "Be careful, Your Grace. Men who rush to correct silence often begin by speaking over it." He absorbed that. It landed where pride still wanted to stand. "Then tell me where to begin." Before she could answer, footsteps sounded beyond the door. Sir Neville Brandt's voice came from the passage, smooth with surprise that arrived too promptly to be innocent. "Your Grace, had I been informed of your return, I would have prepared the accounts for review." Reynolds turned. Sir Neville stood beneath the archway in sober evening dress, rein on his shoulders, concern arranged in every line of his face. "How attentive," Reynolds said. "We will begin with the post-bag." Sir Neville's eyes flickered. "The post-bag, then the correspondence drawer, then the accounts, then the medicines supplied to her Grace." The older man gave a soft, regretful smile. "I fear her Grace has troubled herself with matters too taxing for her strength." Christabel's hand closed around the Morocco case. Reynolds saw it. Sir Neville saw it too. Something cold moved through the chapel and vanished before it could be named. Reynolds stepped not in front of Christabel, but to a place beside the line she already held. "Her Grace will decide what taxes her strength." Sir Neville bowed. "Naturally." "No," Reynolds said. "Not naturally. That is why I am saying it plainly. This household answers to the Duchess of Norbury as it answers to me." Alice went still in the passage. A maid drew in a breath and forgot to hide it. Sir Neville's bow deepened, but the gesture cost him. "As your Grace commands. Bring your correspondence drawer to my study tonight. Locked or unlocked, as you prefer. If locked, I will have it opened." The mask remained, but the man beneath it had heard the strike. "I shall attend to it." When Sir Neville withdrew, the chapel did not become peaceful. It became honest enough to admit danger. Christabel's strength chose that moment to fray. The candle on the pew beside her guttered, wax sliding toward the folded cloth. She reached too quickly to move it. Her breath caught. The curtain slipped. Reynolds caught the brass holder before it fell, then froze with his hand still above the pew, close enough to help and not touching her at all. "Are you unwell?" "Often," she said, after one careful breath. "It doesn't mean I am useless." "I know." Her eyes lifted, skeptical. "Do you?" "I am beginning to." That was all he had earned, no more. She sat slowly on the pew, because sitting had become the wise choice, not because he commanded it. Reynolds set the candle aside and remained standing at a respectful distance. The morocco case rested now in her lap, her pale hand across it, guarding the hidden spoon. "Mrs. Glover will prepare your rooms," she said, "unless London requires you before dawn again." The mildness did not disguise the wound. Reynold looked at the chapel wall, the mended curtains, the primroses, the stain she had chosen to frame until repair could be made. No. The word was quiet and difficult. "I am not leaving tonight." Christabel studied him for a long moment. Norbury Hall required someone to stay. He bowed his head, not as Duke to Duchess, but as a man before a truth that had waited longer than his pride. "Then I will learn how." Sir Neville Brant brought the correspondence drawer to the Duke's study, that night locked. As if a key could still persuade rank to mistake concealment for order, he carried the polished mahogany box himself, and set it upon Reynold's desk with the grave courtesy of a man delivering something tedious rather than incriminating. Christabel sat near the fire because standing after the chapel passage had become unwise, not because she wished anyone in that room to confuse prudence with defeat. Alice remained behind her chair. The morocco medicine case rested closed in Christabel's lap, the silver spoon inside it, wrapped in linen, its grey stain preserved exactly as Dr. Hailwood had instructed. The study had been prepared for masculine authority long before either of them entered it. Heavy curtains kept out the rain. State maps darkened the walls. Shelves of ledgers stood in disciplined rows. Above the mantel, the old Duke of Norbury looked down from his portrait, with the cold certainty of a man who had never been asked whether his comfort had cost anyone else breath. Reynold stood behind the desk and looked at the locked drawer. "Open it." Sir Neville produced the key with a faint, regretful smile. "Your Grace will find routine correspondence, household notes, and some private memoranda. I fear the journey has made this seem more dramatic than it is." "The journey did not open my wife's letters." The key paused halfway into the lock. Christabel's hand tightened once around the medicine case. Sir Neville's smile survived, but not comfortably. "I intended only to spare your Grace unnecessary alarm." Reynold's gaze did not shift. "Open it." The lock turned. Inside lay folded papers, trade bills, sealing wax, loose account pages, and Christabel's 3 letters tied with black ribbon, though they had already been separated from the privacy that made such tying respectful. Reynold lifted the first and held it beneath the lamp. "Exaggerated feminine alarm," he read. His voice had no heat. That made it worse. "Did you write this?" Sir Neville inclined his head. "A private note, Your Grace." Her Grace had been in the house only days and was naturally distressed by unfamiliar arrangements. Distress did not write the coal entries. No, but delicate health may magnify ordinary household matters. Christabel looked up. "Sir Neville, if cold kitchens, unpaid wages, missing medicine, and opened letters are ordinary household matters, then Norbury Hall has been trained to call disorder by a very gentle name." Alice's fingers curled against the back of the chair, but she did not speak. Sir Neville turned toward Christabel with the pity he wore like polished armor. "Your Grace, I would never deny your good intentions. That is wise. They are not yours to deny." Reynold lifted the second letter. Hysterical suspicion. This was written beside her question about medicine. A lady in her Grace's condition can become anxious when attended by too many small changes. The bottle vanished after Dr. Hailwood asked to see the spoon. Sir Neville's lashes lowered, then rose. "Did it? I had not heard. You hear a great deal when it concerns my wife's weakness." Reynold placed the letter down. "You seem less informed when the subject becomes evidence." The word landed softly and changed the room. Sir Neville's expression cooled beneath the courtesy. Evidence is a severe term for household confusion. So is theft for opened correspondence, but I am becoming comfortable with severity. Christabel felt the air sharpen. She had expected anger from Reynold. Anger was simple. What stood before Sir Neville now was not simple. It was the discipline of a man who had discovered that his absence had been used as a tool and did not yet know how much of his own hand remained on its handle. Sir Neville bowed slightly. If I overstepped, I shall of course apologize to Her Grace. Christabel rose before Reynold could answer. Her legs protested at once, and she placed one hand on the arm of the chair until the room steadied. No, Sir Neville blinked. No, Your Grace. You shall not apologize as if this were a spill upon a carpet. You read private words, judged them, and kept them because you thought a sick woman's voice could be useful if needed. I am not a problem to be managed until convenient. The words cost her. She heard the faint thinning in her own breath, but she did not sit. Sir Neville looked toward Reynold, seeking the old path around her. Reynold did not give it. Her Grace has spoken plainly, he said. You will answer plainly. Who authorized you to control the postbag? Your Grace entrusted me with estate discretion. Estate discretion is not marital correspondence. I wished to prevent agitation. Then your wish is dismissed. Reynold took the drawer key and placed it in his waistcoat pocket. From this hour, no account is paid, no letter withheld, no medicine supplied, and no household order enforced without Her Grace's knowledge and mine. Mr. Ellery will come from London to examine every ledger you have touched. The name struck harder than accusation. Sir Neville's face remained still, but his right hand closed at his side. A London solicitor will create unnecessary scandal. No, Reynold said. What created scandal was trusting a quiet thief because he kept his theft tidy. For the first time, Sir Neville forgot to look concerned. Only for a moment. Then the mask returned, thinner than before. I shall not remain where my honor is insulted. Your honor may retire to the Dower Lodge. The drawer stays here. Sir Neville bowed to Reynold, then to Christabel. Your Graces. At the door he paused. I hope Her Grace's strength proves equal to the burdens she invites. Christabel met his gaze. So do I. Burdens are more honest than cages. The door closed behind him. The silence that followed did not ease the pressure in Christabel's chest. If anything, victory made breath harder. She sat because the room had begun to tilt at the edges. Reynold moved one step, then stopped. The effort of stopping showed in his shoulders. What do you need? He asked. Air, not alarm. He crossed to the window and opened it a few inches. Rain-cold night entered the study. Christabel drew one careful breath, then another. The morocco case shifted in her lap as her hand trembled. She reached to steady it and missed. The case slipped, struck the carpet, and opened. Linen loosened, the silver spoon slid free, and came to rest near Reynold's boot, its stained bowl catching firelight with a dull grey gleam. No one moved. The spoon was too small to command such silence. That was why it did. Reynold looked down at it, then at Christabel. Is that the spoon Dr. Hailwood examined? Yes. May I pick it up? The question was so unexpected that it entered her more deeply than any defense he had spoken to Sir Neville. Christabel had been handled by concern, arranged by pity, instructed by men who called control protection. Few people had asked permission over so small a thing. She swallowed. Yes. Reynold crouched and lifted the spoon by the handle, careful not to touch the stained bowl. At the same moment, Christabel reached for the loosened linen. Their gloved fingers met over the little piece of silver. The contact lasted no longer than a held breath. It was not passion. It was not forgiveness. It was the shock of two people discovering that even after abandonment and suspicion, the body could still recognize gentleness when it came without demand. Christabel withdrew first. Not sharply, not cruelly. Because trust had learned caution before it learned warmth. Reynald let her go at once. He placed the spoon upon the linen and set both on the side table within her reach. "Thank you," she said, because courtesy was safer than naming the strange ache behind her ribs. "I should have asked more often," he said, "about the spoon, about everything." Alice looked away quickly as if the study fire had become suddenly interesting. Christabel wrapped the spoon again herself and returned it to the case. Her fingers did not obey neatly. Reynald saw and did not take over. That restraint made her hand tremble worse for one foolish second. "Almost an apology," she said. His mouth tightened. "Almost is not enough." She looked at him then. The answer had not been the easy one. That made it harder to dismiss. Before either could speak again, Mr. Tebb entered to announce Dr. Hailwood. The physician arrived wet from the road and displeased to have been summoned after dark, until he saw Christabel's face, the open window, and the spoon wrapped on the side table. He examined her with brisk care and pronounced no fever, only exhaustion aggravated by strain and poor air. "Poor air is the politest culprit in this house," Christabel murmured. Dr. Hailwood's brows lifted. "Then I shall be impolite. Your Grace must not spend yourself proving what papers can prove more slowly. Papers do not cough. No, but people who ignore coughs often sign them." Reynald stood very still by the desk. Dr. Hailwood asked to see the currant tonic bottle. Alice went upstairs to fetch it from the blue apartments. She returned pale and empty-handed. "It's gone, Your Grace." The physician turned sharply. "The fresh bottle?" "Yes, sir. The tray is there, but the bottle isn't." Reynald's expression hardened. "Who entered Her Grace's rooms after dinner?" Alice shook her head. "Mrs. Glover came with coals. Nell brought warm bricks. I was there most of the time. I don't know who else could have gone in." "From now on," Reynald said, then stopped as Christabel looked at him. The old command had risen in him by instinct. She saw him wrestle it back. "From now on, no one enters your rooms unless you permit it or Alice attends them. If you want a servant stationed in the passage for convenience, I will order it. If you do not, I will not." Dr. Hailwood glanced between them and wisely pretended to review his notes. Christabel let the silence test him. "A footman at the passage turn," she said at last. "Not at my door." "As you choose. It should not have mattered." "It mattered, Doctor." Hailwood took a minute scraping of residue from the spoon's bowl onto a folded paper, then returned the spoon itself to Christabel. "Keep it locked. Do not clean it, and take no medicine I have not seen opened before me. You believe it is wrong. I believe someone is very anxious that I not prove it." He packed his bag. "That is not the same thing. But it is enough." Near midnight, after the physician had gone and the study had been rearranged around the locked correspondence drawer, Mr. Tebb brought a salver with a calling card upon it. Pale blue edge. Elegant script. Reynald picked it up and read the name before his face became unreadable. Lady Amicia Kerslake. Christabel, seated with a blanket over her knees and the morocco case locked beside her chair, looked toward him. "A friend, not yours. Then why does she call?" Reynald turned the card over. Written beneath the engraved name was a flowing note. "How relieved I am. To hear the Duchess is strong enough to receive friends. I shall bring my own strengthening cordial." if country remedies prove insufficient. Christabel felt the air in the study tighten around the word cordial. Reynolds laid the card down as if it had soiled his glove. She should not know about your medicine. No, Christabel said quietly, but she does. Outside, Norbury Hall stood lit against the rain, warmer than it had been, and far less safe than it had seemed. In the locked case beside Christabel's chair, the silver spoon carried its grey stain through the night, like a secret that had begun to frighten the people who buried secrets for a living. Lady Amicia Kerslake arrived at Norbury Hall beneath a sky so clear and polished it seemed, designed to make every shadow indoors look like poor housekeeping. Her barouche came up the drive shortly. After 11, pale wheels turning through gravel, still damp from yesterday's rain, with 2 liveried servants seated behind and a groom riding ahead as if announcing a queen rather than a county lady who had not been invited. Christabel watched from the drawing-room window with one hand resting on the sill and the other tucked into the folds of her shawl. The silver spoon was not in that room. It remained locked in the Morocco medicine case inside the lower drawer of her writing table upstairs. Wrapped in linen, stained, uncleaned, and no longer known merely to herself. Dr. Hailwood had taken a small scraping of residue the night before, but the spoons itself had been returned to Christabel by her own hand. She kept that fact in her mind like a pin holding cloth in place. In a house where objects vanished when they became inconvenient, one survived by knowing where everything rested. Behind her, Reynolds stood near the mantel. He had been awake since before dawn, reviewing the dispatch book, the recovered letters, and Sir Neville's altered ledger until the study fire burned low. He looked composed to anyone who had not begun to understand him. Christabel had, inconveniently, begun. She saw the fatigue beneath his stillness and the anger disciplined into silence. "You do not have to receive her," he said. Christabel watched Lady Amicia descend from the carriage in pale lilac silk, every movement soft enough to look harmless and exact enough to be practiced. "If I refuse, what will she say? That you are unwell, and if I receive her, she will say it with better witnesses. Then I prefer witnesses." Reynolds' mouth tightened, not in disapproval, but in the old instinct to put himself between her and harm. He did not obey it. That mattered. "Lady Amicia's family once assumed an understanding might form between us," he said. "County gossip assumed more. I did not encourage it, but I did not correct it as firmly as I should have." Christabel turned from the window. "So she comes to inspect a vacancy she believes I stole." "There is no vacancy." "There was," Christabel said. "You left one." He accepted the words without defense. "Yes." That quiet answer unsettled her more than contradiction would have done. Mr. Tebb announced Lady Amicia with full formality. She entered the drawing-room in a drift of violet scent, fair hair, arranged in flawless loops beneath her bonnet, gloves pale as pearl, smile tender enough to comfort the dying or condemn them more politely. She curtsied first to Reynolds, not too deeply, and with the ease of a woman accustomed to old access. "Your Grace, how good to see Norbury awake again." Then she turned to Christabel, and the softness in her face deepened into pity. "Dear Duchess, at last. I have been so anxious to meet the brave lady who has endured this melancholy house while so sadly delicate." The insult wore lace. Christabel inclined her head. "Lady Amicia, Norbury Hall rewards attention more than endurance. Please sit." A flicker passed through Lady Amicia's eyes. It was gone before most people would have noticed. Christabel had spent a week studying hidden locks, she noticed. How admirably spirited Lady Amicia said, accepting the chair nearest the tea-table. I told Sir Neville that illness often lends ladies a touching determination over small things. Alice, standing by the tea-tray, went very still. Reynolds's hand closed once around the mantel edge. Christabel poured tea before either could speak. The act steadied her because it required exactness. Do you take sugar? 1 lump, thank you. I do not indulge overmuch. One must preserve the constitution one has. A prudent habit. Christabel placed the cup before her, though constitutions are not always improved by being admired from a distance. Lady Amicia smiled. You have wit. I had expected you to be quieter. Many people have found it convenient to expect that. Lady Amicia's gaze moved around the room, measuring every improvement Christabel had ordered. The shutters had been opened, the carpet beaten, the green dust covers removed. A stack of tenant petitions lay on the writing table beside a sample of coarse flannel misses Pike had found in the old stores. There were still faded places on the walls, still a crack near the chandelier, still evidence of years spent pretending decline was dignity, but the room no longer apologized for being lived in. Lady Amicia touched the flannel with the tip of one glove. How industrious! Sir Neville said you had taken a very touching interest in the lower household. The lower household keeps the upper one alive. Of course. Still, a duchess must be careful. Too much intimacy with servants confuses natural order. Christabel set down the teapot. Cold hands are rarely confused about natural order. They know precisely who has a fire and who has been told to wait. A silence followed, not long but enough for the room to choose sides and regret having to do so. Reynolds did not speak. He let her answer. The restraint had weight. Lady Amicia noticed it and adjusted her attack. You must forgive me. I am relieved His Grace has returned before you spend yourself on duties better left to those familiar with Norbury. Such as Sir Neville, he has been invaluable. To whom? The question was gentle. Its blade was not. Lady Amicia lifted her cup and took the smallest possible sip. To His Grace, naturally. To the estate. To those of us who care for the house's dignity. How fortunate dignity has so many guardians. Christabel lifted the flannel sample. I have found it more practical when it comes with stockings. Reynolds's eyes moved to her then, and for one brief moment, the room disappeared from his expression. Not admiration alone. Recognition. She looked away first, because she had not invited warmth and did not yet know where to place it. Lady Amicia's smile thinned. County society can be unforgiving, Duchess. It dislikes scenes, especially when illness makes judgment uncertain. Then county society should be grateful I prefer order. Order? Yes. Fires where coal has been paid for. Wages where wages have been recorded. Letters sent when sealed. Medicine given only when prescribed. The last word struck. Lady Amicia's lashes lowered, not quickly enough. Reynolds saw it. Christabel saw him see it. Medicine is such a delicate subject, Lady Amicia said softly. Sir Neville mentioned that Dr. Hailwood had made you anxious. Christabel felt the room tighten around the name. Did he? Only out of concern? How generous of him to lend you mine. Lady Amicia's cup paused above its saucer. Reynolds spoke then, not over Christabel, but after she had opened the door. Dr. Hailwood is Her Grace's physician. That is sufficient. Lady Amicia turned toward him with wounded innocence. I did not mean to intrude. Then do not. The simplicity of it landed harder than anger. Mr. Tebb, near the door, lowered his eyes, though Christabel suspected he did so to hide satisfaction. Lady Amicia recovered beautifully. I only wished to offer my own strengthening cordial. Should country mixtures prove unreliable, Mine is much admired. Please do not trouble yourself, Christabel said. I now take nothing, Doctor. Halewood has not seen opened before me. For the first time, Lady Amicia looked not pitying but alert. Then she smiled again. How very cautious. Experience is an excellent tutor when one survives the lesson. The visit continued for 20 more minutes, each minute polished and edged. Lady Amicia praised the fires as charming, the chapel curtains as sentimental, Nell's stockings as generous, and tenant repairs as ambitious, for one in uncertain health. Christabel answered each thrust with courtesy, because rudeness would have offered relief, and she did not intend to relieve anyone. When Nell entered with fresh cakes, grey wool visible beneath her plain skirt, Lady Amicia's gaze dropped and rose. Nothing in her expression changed, but the observation was taken away like a stolen sketch. As she left, Sir Neville appeared in the hall as though summoned by coincidence and not by a shared design. He bowed over Lady Amicia's hand. Their exchange lasted barely a breath, but Christabel saw Lady Amicia's fingers tighten around the edge of her reticule. Sir Neville glanced toward the drawing room, toward the writing table, toward the door, beyond which the main staircase led to the blue apartments. Reynold stepped into the hall. Sir Neville straightened. Your Grace, I had hoped to speak with Lady Amicia regarding chapel attendance. How efficient. Your hopes so often arrive when useful. Sir Neville smiled. I live to serve. Then begin by remembering that Her Grace's visitors are not to be briefed on her medicine. Lady Amicia went very still beneath her bonnet. Sir Neville bowed. Of course. When the barouche finally rolled away, Christabel allowed herself to lean against the drawing-room chair. The effort of the visit settled into her chest like damp cloth. Reynold remained by the window until the lilac bonnet vanished beyond the curve of the drive. You were right, he said. She came to inspect a vacancy. Yes. Did she find one? He turned from the glass. No. The answer was immediate, and because it was immediate, it touched some place Christabel had meant to keep armored. She looked down at the petitions. Do not sound certain, merely because guilt has made you loyal for a morning. He came no nearer. Then I will be certain again tomorrow, and the day after, until habit makes better proof than words. Before she could answer, Mr. Tebb entered with a folded sheet on a salver. From London, Your Grace, brought with the afternoon post. Reynold unfolded it. His face hardened before he finished the first line. Christabel extended her hand. He hesitated, only because the paper was cruel, then gave it to her because withholding cruelty had become one of the House's oldest crimes. The headline was not large, but it knew where to strike. The sickly Duchess rules Norbury, from her bed. Beneath it, an anonymous paragraph mocked a fragile bride, wasting ducal resources on servant, flannel, kitchen coal, and chapel prettiness, while wiser judgment was pushed aside. Christabel read every word. Then she folded the sheet once, very neatly, and set it beside the tenant petitions. Well, she said, though her voice came softer than she intended, at least they admit I rule. Reynold looked at her with an expression that made pity seem thin and useless. Admiration asked what strength had cost. Christabel. Her name in his voice was too gentle for safety. She rose before it could undo her. I will rest now. This time he did not offer his arm without asking. He did not move to manage her path. He waited, and because he waited, some small foolish part of her wished he would speak. Would you like Alice? He asked. Or my arm as far as the stairs? The choice was the important thing. She looked at him, at the man still learning how not to turn care into command. Alice, she said, but thank you for asking. He bowed his head, At the door, she paused. Lady Amicia knew Dr. Hailwood's name before I mentioned him. I noticed. Good. Her hand touched the frame lightly as breath thinned. Then, we are both learning to listen. Behind her, the folded gossip sheet lay beside the servant list and the tenant petitions. Upstairs, the stained spoon remained locked in its case. Beyond the drive, Lady Amicia carried away the knowledge that the invalid Duchess was not nearly as alone as she had been promised. The family chapel bell rang at 10 o'clock on a morning bright enough to make Norbury Hall look almost innocent. Its note was modest, a small bronze sound from the turret above the east wall, but it travelled through passages that had not heard it in 7 years and stirred the house more deeply than any grand peal could have done. Christabel heard it from the blue apartments, while Alice fastened the last hooks of her soft grey gown and pinned her mother's small pearl at her throat. The gown did not flatter her colour. Nothing would have done that morning. Her face in the glass was pale, the hollows beneath her eyes darkened by a night of uneven sleep, and her breath already required quiet management. Yet she stood without leaning on the dressing table. That was enough. The silver medicine spoon remained locked in the lower drawer of the writing table, inside the morocco case, wrapped in linen, uncleaned and stained as Dr. Hailwood had ordered. Christabel looked once toward the drawer before leaving the room. "No one opens that but me," she said. Alice followed her gaze. "I won't let anyone near it. Do not guard it with panic. Panic tells thieves where to look." Alice swallowed. "Yes, Your Grace." Downstairs, Norbury had been arranged for public respectability with the anxious care of a household trying to stand upright before judgment. The entrance hall had been swept and warmed. The chapel curtains, washed and mended rather than replaced, hung clean enough to honour the room and imperfect enough to tell the truth. Tenant children had brought primroses again, placing them crookedly along the sill until even the rector's wife had smiled despite herself. County neighbours arrived with folded curiosity beneath their bonnets. Tenants came in their Sunday coats. Servants moved quietly along the edges, not hidden fully, because Christabel had said restoration should not be performed by invisible hands. Lady Amicia Kerslake came in pale green silk and a bonnet trimmed with white ribbon, looking as fresh as spring and twice as calculated. Sir Neville Brant arrived with a leather portfolio beneath his arm. Christabel saw it before she saw his face. So did Reynald. The Duke stood near the chapel door in dark mourning clothes, composed and watchful. When Christabel reached the hall, his attention came to her at once. He did not offer his arm immediately. His hand shifted at his side, then remained open, the choice visible but unpressed. The memory of the spoon touch in the study lay between them, small and bright as a coal under ash. "Your Grace," she said, "Duchess." His voice was low enough for her alone. "Are you certain?" "No." His eyes sharpened. "But certainty is not required for courage." "No," he said, and something in his expression changed, not soft enough to embarrass her before witnesses, but human enough that she felt it. "It isn't." They entered the chapel side by side, not touching. That absence mattered because everyone saw it was chosen, not cold. The service was brief. The rector spoke of duty, restoration, and houses made worthy by the care they showed the least regarded beneath their roofs. Christabel listened while the air grew close around too many bodies. Her gloved hand rested lightly on the pew. Reynald's gaze never pinned her, but she felt the discipline of his attention, steady and restrained. After prayers, refreshments were laid in the adjoining hall. That was when Sir Neville opened his portfolio. He did it slowly, with sorrow practiced to look reluctant. "Your Grace," he said to Reynold, voice carrying farther than private business required. "I had hoped not to disturb so hopeful an occasion." Reynold looked at him. "Then do not." A faint movement passed through the county guests. Sir Neville bowed. "I fear delay would deepen impropriety." Lady Amicia lowered her lashes. "Surely business can wait, Sir Neville. Her Grace has already borne so much." Christabel heard the trap close. Pity first, accusation second. Sir Neville drew out a folded account page bearing a seal impression at the bottom. Certain expenditures authorized in Her Grace's name appear to have exceeded prudent household necessity. Coal diverted from reception rooms, servant wool, chapel fabric, tenant repairs promised without proper review. In ordinary circumstances, such generosity might be admired as youthful feeling, but recent disturbances concerning letters, medicine, and Her Grace's health oblige me to advise that estate and household authority be temporarily removed from her hands until a physician certifies her composure. The hall went silent, not empty silent, listening silent, the worst kind, because it waited to discover whether weakness would confirm the accusation. Lady Amicia turned toward Christabel with exquisite grief. "Dear Duchess, no one blames you. You've been brave, but bravery isn't always strength." The words moved through the room and found every old wound, sickly, delicate, nervous, useful if needed. Christabel felt her breath narrow. Alice shifted near the wall. Mrs. Glover's face had gone hard with belated anger. Reynold reached toward the paper, but Sir Neville held it just long enough for the gesture to be seen by every witness. Christabel understood then that Sir Neville did not merely wish to accuse her. He wished the room to see her husband taking the matter from her. She spoke before Reynold's hand closed on the page. "Read it aloud." Sir Neville turned, mild surprise arranged upon his mouth. "Your Grace, if the account proves mismanagement, let the room hear every line." Lady Amicia stepped closer. "That isn't necessary. You mustn't distress yourself before everyone." "If I am accused before everyone, I will hear the evidence before everyone." Christabel's vision blurred at the edges. She kept her hand on the pew and refused the chair. A footman hurried forward. Not yet. If she sat at the wrong moment, the room would remember the chair more than the truth. She looked at Reynold. For one terrible breath, the old fear opened in her. Would he protect her by removing her? Would he mistake her failing lungs for a failing mind? Reynold did not take the paper first. He extended his hand to her, palm upward, in full view of the hall. "If you wish to stand," he said quietly, "stand with me." The offer traveled through the room like a second bell. It did not command. It did not conceal. It asked. Christabel looked at that open hand and remembered the carriage step where he had stopped, the study carpet where he had asked, before lifting the spoon, the drawing room where he had offered Alice or his arm and accepted her answer. This time she chose before everyone. She placed her gloved hand in his. His fingers closed only enough to steady, not enough to claim. Warmth moved through kid leather. She had not known how much of herself had been braced against falling until she was allowed support without surrender. "Read," Reynold said to Sir Neville. The older man's complexion had lost its ease. He began. Coal from West reception stores redirected to kitchen and servants' hall. Reynold turned slightly. "Mrs. Pike, was that coal received?" The cook, standing near the service arch, curtsied with flowerless hands clasped tight. "Yes, Your Grace. First proper kitchen fire since Christmas." A murmur stirred among the tenants. Sir Neville continued. 3 pairs wool stockings, 1 shawl, flannel yardage, charged irregularly to household expense. Nell Sowerby, Christabel said. The scullery maid went white. Reynolds's hand remained steady around Christabel's. Come forward only if you wish, Christabel added. Nell stepped out, trembling. Are those stockings yours? Christabel asked. Yes, Your Grace. Were they given to buy loyalty? Nell looked horrified. No, Your Grace. You saw I was cold. The simplicity of it struck harder than any prepared defense. Lady Amicia smiled sadly. No one questions kindness. We question whether kindness becomes confusion when a lady is ill. Then let us continue with dates, Christabel said. Read Widow Arkwright's roof. Sir Neville looked down. Inspection approved in January. Repair deferred pending funds. I arrived in April. Was January waiting for my poor judgment? A sharper murmur moved now. One tenant woman crossed herself softly. Sir Neville's jaw tightened. The issue is not one repair, but a pattern of agitation. No, Christabel said. The issue is that deprivation was called prudence until someone cold enough to be ignored became inconvenient enough to notice. Her breath caught on the last word. Reynolds' hand steadied, but he did not speak over her. Lady Amicia leaned in, voice honeyed with poison. Duchess, please. This display will only confirm what Sir Neville fears. Christabel turned to her. If I was too weak to order coal, why was I strong enough to bear the blame for its absence? The hall stilled again, but now the silence had changed. It was no longer waiting for her to fail. It was waiting for Sir Neville to answer. He did not. He lifted the account page higher. Your Grace, he said to Reynolds, for the dignity of the house, I must insist Her Grace be relieved until medical composure is confirmed. Reynolds took the page from him at last. This time Sir Neville released it. Reynolds studied the seal at the bottom. This impression is not from Her Grace's desk. Sir Neville answered too quickly. Household papers move through several offices, including yours. Reynolds folded the paper once. Mr. Ellery will audit every account. Until then, no authority will be removed from Her Grace. Lady Amicia's eyes brightened with the first visible spark of anger. What romantic loyalty! Reynolds did not look at her. No, legal and moral clarity. Her Grace asked for accounts to be read. You asked that they be hidden behind her health. The rector's wife lowered her gaze. Mrs. Glover wiped her hands on her apron as though erasing old complicity. Sir Neville bowed, but the bow had become a concession, not courtesy, as your Grace commands. After the guests dispersed into tight, whispering clusters, tenants bowed to Christabel with a respect that did not pity, that almost undid her. She held together until Reynolds asked, May I escort you to the blue sitting room? Escorting is not managing, not if you may refuse. She looked at him, then at the corridor ahead, then yes. She took his arm only as far as the main stair. It was enough. Upstairs, Alice helped her into the blue sitting room, where the warmth from the newly tended fire met her like mercy. Christabel waited until the door closed, then crossed to the writing table. Her hand shook badly now. She unlocked the lower drawer, drew out the morocco case, and opened it. The folded linen lay exactly where she had left it. The indentation of the silver spoon remained pressed in the cloth, but the spoon itself was gone. For a moment, the room lost all sound. Alice whispered, Your Grace. Christabel touched the empty linen. Below stairs, beyond walls and witnesses and half-spoken loyalties, carriage wheels rolled away toward the Dower Lodge. Sir Neville had carried a forged account. Lady Amicia had smiled too sweetly, and now, the one small object that could prove the medicine had been altered had vanished from the only drawer Christabel had trusted. By midnight, the blue apartments had been searched so thoroughly that even Alice's sewing basket seemed to accuse the room of hiding things it did not possess. Every drawer had been opened, every folded shawl shaken. The writing table had been moved from the wall, the hearth swept, the carpet edges lifted, and the Morocco medicine case examined until its empty linen wrapping became more terrible than a broken lock would have been. The silver spoon remained gone. Christabel sat near the fire with the household keys at her waist and the empty linen square upon her lap, its small blue cross stitched in one corner by Alice's hand. She had asked for no tears. Alice had shed them anyway, silently, while pretending to search beneath the bed for the third time. Mrs. Glover had come herself, pale with anger and shame, and checked every maid's movements since the chapel gathering. Mr. Tebb had questioned the footman with a restraint that made their answers more frightened than any shouting could have done. Reynolds had ordered that no servant leave the house until the matter was understood, then stopped when Christabel looked at him. She had not needed to speak. He heard the old command in himself and changed it before it hardened. "No one is confined," he said, voice controlled. "Everyone is to remain available until her grace has been answered. That is all." It was better. It was still too late for the spoon. Christabel touched the indentation left in the linen. "Who knew where it was?" Reynolds asked from beside the hearth. He had not sat. "U.I. Alice, Mr. Tebb." "Dr. Hailwood knew it was locked in my rooms after I told him. Mrs. Glover knew there was a drawer, but not which object mattered most. Sir Neville knew there was evidence he had not seen, and Lady Amicia knew there was a question of medicine. I allowed both within reach of the house." "No," Christabel said. "They came because the chapel was public. Public truth always teaches lies to move quickly." He looked at her then, and she saw the effort it cost him not to take blame merely because guilt wanted occupation. "The spoon may not be destroyed," she said. "It may be more useful to them if it appears somewhere else." Alice made a small sound. "Your Grace, don't say that. If I do not say what a cruel person might do, I leave the room to them." Reynolds' eyes darkened. "Then we will be ready." Before dawn, readiness proved too slow. A stable boy, sent by Mrs. Glover to fetch warm bricks from the lower passage, reported that a groom from the Dower Lodge had been seen crossing the service yard in the earliest grey, speaking briefly to one of Sir Neville's men near the coal door before riding away. The boy had thought nothing of it until Mrs. Glover, whose shame had sharpened into discipline, asked whether anyone not belonging to Norbury had been near the house. By the time the news reached the blue sitting room, Dr. Hailwood had already arrived in his brown coat, hat damp from mist, medical bag in hand. "A Dower Lodge groom," Reynolds repeated. "At daybreak, so the boy says, Your Grace," Mr. Tebb answered. He saw the Brant livery. Christabel looked toward Dr. Hailwood's bag before she knew why. The physician set it down on the small table beside her chair and opened it to remove his instruments. A folded strip of linen slipped from the mouth of the bag and fell onto the carpet. Alice gasped. No one moved. Christabel knew the little blue cross before the cloth was unfolded. Her lungs seemed to forget their duty. Reynolds picked up the linen and opened it with care. The silver medicine spoon lay in the center, its grey-stained bowl dull against the white cloth. Dr. Hailwood went still in a way no guilty man would have had the discipline to imitate. "That is not mine." His voice was rough. "I did not place it there." Reynolds' face became unreadable. "When did you last open the bag?" "In the lower hall last night. after I left her grace. I stopped to speak with Mr. Tebb about sending a note to Dr. Hargreaves in London. Was it unattended? The doctor closed his eyes once, angry with himself, for a few minutes. A footman called me to sign a message for the apothecary. I believed it safe. Safe, Christabel said softly. The word had become almost absurd at Norbury Hall. Dr. Hailwood turned to her. Your Grace, I swear to you, I asked you to preserve the spoon. I would not steal what I asked you to keep. She looked at his flushed face. The hands that had healed tenants and children and elderly servants without asking whether their pain was socially convenient. Honest fear did not arrange itself prettily. I believe you, she said. Relief struck him so visibly that Alice looked away. Reynald heard a movement in the corridor and turned. Sir Neville entered without waiting to be announced. Lady Amicia 2 steps behind him, in mourning blue, with a veil light enough to be decorative and dark enough to suggest mourning for propriety. Their arrival was too quick now to pretend innocence. Sir Neville's eyes went first to the spoon in Reynald's hand, then to Dr. Hailwood's open bag. Your Grace, he said, sorrow already prepared. I feared the matter might worsen. Lady Amicia pressed gloved fingers to her breast. Dear Duchess, how dreadful to have an object vanish from your room and appear with the very physician who encouraged your alarm. One hardly knows whom to trust. Christabel kept her gaze on Sir Neville. You knew where to come, very quickly. A servant from the Dower Lodge brought word that there was distress in the household. Before the household knew what had been found, his pause was brief, but it existed. Rumour travels. Reynald laid the spoon back upon the linen without releasing control of the room. So do grooms, apparently. Sir Neville's smile cooled. I am sure no one wishes to make wild accusations from the sight of ordinary servants. No, Christabel said. You prefer wild accusations from the sight of an ordinary spoon. Lady Amicia's mouth tightened. No one accuses you, Duchess. We fear for you. Letters, medicine, accounts, chapel scenes, now a physician compromised by evidence in his own bag. It may be time to accept that responsibility has overtaxed your strength. Dr. Hailwood flushed. Madam, I am not compromised by another person's trick. Intentions are so difficult to prove, Sir Neville said. Appearances are less merciful. Your Grace, for her Grace's peace and the estate's dignity, household authority should be suspended until Mr. Ellery arrives, if he must arrive at all. Reynald turned toward Christabel before answering. That was progress. What he said next broke it. Until this is resolved, perhaps estate matters should pause. The room changed. Not loudly, not even visibly to everyone. Christabel felt it as one feels as a candle blown out behind the back. Pause, she repeated. Not removed, Reynald said quickly. Only paused while I investigate. Sir Neville is waiting for any sign that you are being overtaxed, if you rest for a few days. While you investigate, with you informed, but not acting, protected. The word landed exactly where Sir Neville and Lady Amicia had been aiming all morning. Christabel rose. Alice reached for her, but Christabel lifted one hand, and the maid stopped with tears bright in her eyes. Christabel's knees felt uncertain. Her breath hurt. Her dignity did not. Your Grace, she said, using his title because his name would have made the wound too intimate. When you left me here, everyone used my health as the reason I should not know. Now you have returned, and you use my health as the reason I should not act. Reynald went pale. That isn't what I mean. It is what the room heard. Lady Amicia lowered her eyes to hide satisfaction. Sir Neville did not hide quickly enough. Reynald stepped toward her, then stopped because she had not invited him. Christabel, Don't let them turn this against us. They did not. Her voice shook once and steadied. You did. The words wounded him. She saw that. It almost softened her, which was precisely why she crossed to the little table where the household keys lay after Mrs. Glover had returned them for the chapel day. The chatelaine was heavy when she lifted it, practical and unlovely. She carried it to the larger table before Reynolds. Each step had to be chosen. Each breath had to be earned. I am not abandoning Norbury Hall, she said. I am refusing to govern it under suspicion. She set the keys down. The metal struck wood with a clean sound that seemed to travel through every old lock in the house. Mrs. Glover made a small, broken noise. Mr. Tebb, at the door, closed his eyes. Lady Amicia sighed. How sad, but perhaps wise. Christabel turned to her. Do not mistake grief for surrender. The rival's smile died. Christabel looked once more at Reynolds. The pain in his face was real, but real pain did not make him right. You left me once in an empty house, she said. Do not make me empty inside it. She walked out with Alice beside her, upright, because the servants were watching from doorways, and because hope, once given to a house, must not be seen easily dropped. Reynolds did not follow. It was the first correct thing he did after the wrong one. Behind her, Sir Neville spoke in a low voice, meant to soothe and persuade. Your Grace, painful as this is, it may prevent greater scandal. Reynolds did not answer. His eyes remained on the keys. By dusk, after Sir Neville and Lady Amicia had departed with triumph disguised as concern, Reynolds stood alone before the carved oak screen leading to the west wing. The keys Christabel had returned hung from his fist, heavier than iron should have been. He tried 3 before, one turned in the lock. The door opened with a long breath of stale air. Dust lay thick along the runner. Eleanor Fane's half-covered portrait watched from the passage. Her painted eyes visible, above the cloth Christabel had refused to draw fully down. Reynolds crossed to the narrow cabinet at the far end, where the lock showed bright scratches from recent use. Inside lay a thin leather book tied with faded blue thread. He opened it beneath the lamp. On the first page, in a careful old medical hand, was written, Her Grace Eleanor Fane, Duchess of Norbury, strengthening drafts, household administration, West Wing, confinement. Reynolds read the words once, then again, until his mother's name and his wife's suffering became part of the same more terrible sentence. Both times, men had called silence care. Both times, a duchess had been made easier to manage by being made easier to doubt. Reynolds did not sleep after opening the West Wing cabinet. He sat until dawn in the abandoned sitting room where his mother had once been instructed to recover quietly. With the thin leather medicine ledger open across his knees and the household keys lying on the table beside a lamp that smoked in the stale air. Dust marked his sleeves. A smear of old ash darkened one cuff. Outside the narrow window, morning gathered over the terrace in a pale line, but the room seemed unwilling to admit light. The ledger had been written in a careful medical hand, every cruelty dressed in the language of care. Her Grace agitated after discussion of household accounts. Rest prescribed, letters delayed to prevent distress. Visitors denied owing to nervous sensitivity. Fires reduced, excessive warmth encourages wandering. Keys removed for Her Grace's peace. Reynolds read that last line until the ink became his own voice. He had said pause. He had said protected. Sir Neville had said peace. His father had said rest. Different men, different years, the same locked door. Eleanor Fane had faded in this wing while the old Duke called silence discipline. Christabel had been left in the same house. with the same words gathering around her illness like hands. Reynald closed the ledger only when his fingers began to ache from gripping it. He took the keys and went to the blue sitting room before courage could make itself complicated. Christabel was not in bed. He should have known she would not be. She sat near the window in a dark blue shawl, a stack of tenant notes resting in her lap, and Alice standing close enough to disapprove of every paper without daring to remove one. The household keys were absent from Christabel's waist, and the absence changed her more than illness had. It was not that she looked smaller. She did not. It was that the room seemed less certain where its center belonged. Her eyes lifted when Reynald entered. They were tired, guarded, and steady. "I found my mother's medicine ledger," he said. Alice drew in a sharp breath. Christabel did not. "In the West Wing cabinet?" "Yes." "Then the locked places are beginning to answer." Not kindly. He came no farther than the middle of the room. The keys made a soft sound in his hand, and Christabel's gaze moved to them once before returning to his face. "If you have come to return those because guilt kept you awake, Your Grace, keep them until guilt becomes judgment." The words struck cleanly. He bowed his head. "I have not come to pretend yesterday did not happen. That would be unwise. Several people witnessed it. I asked you to pause because I was afraid. Of scandal, of losing you before I understood what was being done to you." Her fingers tightened on the tenant notes. Reynald heard the danger in his own answer. Fear could still make him sound noble if he allowed it. He did not. "That fear does not excuse me. It explains only the shape of my failure. I used your health to take choice from you. Sir Neville did it with contempt. I did it with concern. The result was too nearly the same." Christabel looked out toward the terrace where rain clung to the glass. "Why did you leave me here?" she asked. "Not business, not the answer a man gives because it fits inside a letter. The true one." Reynald had lived more years than he liked to count inside the shelter of saying nothing. Silence had carried him through his mother's funeral, his father's commands, London dinners, and every return to Norbury Hall when the West Wing waited like a sealed wound. But silence had also opened his wife's letters for another man. Silence had put bitter medicine on her tray. Silence had taught a servant child to be grateful for cold. He looked at the keys in his palm. "Because this house remembers her," he said. "My mother, she died in that wing when I was 12. Before she died, she disappeared by inches. If she asked for the accounts, my father said business agitated her. If she asked to see visitors, he said society tired her. If she asked for me, he said boys should not be made anxious by sick rooms." His voice roughened, but he forced the rest through. "I used to stand near the carved screen and listen. Sometimes she coughed. Sometimes I heard nothing, and that frightened me more. After she died, my father locked the wing and told me grief must be disciplined. I thought I had escaped him, because I did not shout, did not drink, did not disgrace women in public, did not call cruelty by its old names. Then I brought you here, saw you were ill, and fled before your need could ask anything of me." Christabel's face changed, not softening into forgiveness, but deepening into understanding. That was almost harder to bear. "You thought leaving was mercy." "Yes, and leaving made you his echo." He closed his eyes once. "Yes." Alice turned toward the window and wiped her face with the edge of her apron. Reynald placed the keys on the small table beside Christabel, not in her lap, not into her hand, not as if returning them could erase the taking. "I abandoned you. I distrusted you when your evidence disturbed my convenience. I tried to control you when fear made me weak. I am sorry, Christabel, not for the scandal, not for discomfort, for the harm. If you never again trust me with authority I should have honored from the first, I will still restore yours before this house." The tenant notes trembled once in her lap. She looked down at them. "Those are better words. Not enough, no." Her answer was quiet and did not spare him. "No, they are not enough." After a moment she said, "Alice, ask Mrs. Glover to send tea in half an hour." Alice hesitated, then understood that kindness could be dismissal. Once the maid had gone, the room seemed larger and more fragile. Christabel reached for the water glass on the table, but her fingers missed the stem. Reynold did not take her hand. He asked, "May I hand it to you?" She closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them, something in her had yielded to the question rather than to him. Yes, he gave her the glass. She drank, then set it down. A cough came suddenly, dry and bending, and he held himself still while every instinct in him strained to move. When it passed, her eyes were wet from effort. "I dislike being observed at my least impressive." "You are wrong about when you are least impressive." She gave him a look, sharp, even through fatigue. That sounded dangerously like comfort. It was meant as respect. The silence after that nearly undid him. Christabel set the tenant notes aside and looked at the keys. For one moment he thought she would take them. Instead, she stood. The movement was not graceful, but it was determined. Reynold rose as well, then stopped because she had not asked him closer. She came one measured step toward him. Then another. The space between them held the chapel, the spoon, the letters, the keys, and every wrong thing that had not yet been repaired. "Reynold," she said. It was the first time she had spoken his name without title, when pain was not forcing it out. He became very still. "You may stand closer." He obeyed slowly, near enough to offer warmth, not near enough to take. Her hand lifted, then stopped against the front of his coat, fingers resting there with the lightest pressure. He could feel the tremor in them. He could also feel the choice. "May I hold you?" he asked. Her breath caught once, not in fear exactly, in the difficulty of allowing care to come without chains. For a moment, he folded his arms around her with the care one gives not to glass, but to something living that has chosen not to flee. No force, no claim, only warmth held carefully between two people who had earned the right to be frightened of it. Christabel rested her brow against his coat. He did not speak. He did not move his hand over her back. He held still because stillness, for once, was not absence. It was obedience. After 3 breaths, she let herself lean the smallest degree more, and the trust in that slight weight struck him harder than any accusation had. Then she withdrew. He let her go at once. Her face was pale, but her eyes were clear. "This doesn't mend everything." "No," he said. "It tells me where to begin." She looked at him for a long moment, then turned back to the table and took up the keys. The metal rang softly as she fastened them at her waist. "Then begin by not running from this house again." "I will not." A knock sounded before either could say more. Mr. Tebb entered, flushed with urgency and hope he had not allowed himself in years. "Your Grace, Your Grace, a travelling chaise has arrived from London." Reynold turned. Through the window, mud-spattered wheels rolled into view below, and a man stepped down with 2 leather document cases held close against the rain. "Mr. Ellery," Reynold said. Christabel's hand closed over the keys at her waist. "Then the accounts have arrived before the Lie's finished dressing for dinner." Mr. Ellery entered Norbury Hall as though rain, haste, and aristocratic scandal were all minor inconveniences to be arranged into proper order by ink. He was a spare man in a dark travelling coat, with silver at his temples, mud on his boots, and 2 leather document cases held close beneath one arm. He bowed first to Reynolds, then to Christabel with equal exactness, his eyes moving once to the household keys, newly restored at her waist. The small acknowledgment did more to steady her than another chair would have done. "Your Grace, your Grace. I came as quickly as the roads allowed. I have brought the duplicate estate ledgers, trustee appointments, repair disbursement copies, London merchant statements, and the old abstracts from Norbury's southern rents." Reynolds led them into the library rather than the study, because the study still smelled of Sir Neville's authority, and Christabel noticed the choice. He did not announce it. He simply placed Mr. Ellery's cases on the long table beneath the windows and waited until she had taken the chair nearest the light before he sat anywhere himself. Dr. Hailwood had arrived not long after the solicitor, summoned by Mr. Tebb, and stood near the hearth with his own written statement folded in his hand. The silver spoon, recovered that morning from his medical bag and wrapped again in Alice's Blue Cross linen, had been placed inside a small, locked, glass-topped specimen case from Reynolds' cabinet of mineral samples. It lay beside the West Wing medicine ledger and Christabel's intercepted letters, the grey stain visible under glass, no longer hidden, no longer touchable, not yet safe. Mr. Ellery examined the arrangement without surprise. Good. Objects invite lies unless one gives them witnesses. Christabel looked at him. Then let us make the witnesses useful. The solicitor's severe mouth almost warmed. Precisely, Your Grace. For the next hour, Norbury Hall's suffering stopped being rumour and became sequence. Mr. Ellery did not drown the room in numbers. He drew a line from each false entry to the body or room that had borne it. Coal had been paid for in January, charged at full winter weight, but Mrs. Pike's kitchen had gone cold. Wages had been recorded for the undergardener, yet the man had borrowed from a tenant cousin to buy bread. Chapel curtains had been entered as mended 2 years before Christabel arrived, though they had hung damp-rotted until her hands directed them down. Widow Arkwright's roof was marked inspected, then deferred, then quietly charged as repaired. "This is not thrift," Mr. Ellery said, tapping the duplicate ledger. "It is extraction made respectable." Christabel leaned closer. The words on the page blurred for one breath, then steadied. The handwriting on the forged chapel account page copied these phrases. Reynolds' gaze came to her, attentive but not interrupting. She placed the page Sir Neville had used at the chapel beside the old entries. "See here. Temporary domestic adjustment. He used it for unpaid wages, then again for coal, then again for my supposed overreach." Mr. Ellery bent over the comparison. A copied habit. Better than a signature sometimes. Vanity thinks phrasing is invisible. Reynolds looked at the page, then at Christabel. "You saw it before I did. I had more practice being made into a phrase." He absorbed that without defense. Dr. Hailwood unfolded his statement and laid it near the spoon. "The residue from Her Grace's spoon does not match the odor or texture of the tonic described in Dr. Hargreaves' instructions. I cannot name the substance without more, but I can state it should not have been present in the prescribed mixture." Mr. Ellery nodded. "Careful language, useful language. I dislike useful language where illness is concerned," Dr. Hailwood said. "Then make it exact and let others be uncomfortable." A knock came before Reynolds could answer. Mr. Tebb entered with a folded note on a tray. "From the village apothecary, Your Grace, brought by his boy." Reynolds reached for it, then stopped and looked at Christabel. "Will you read it?" The room did not change, yet everything in her did. He had not offered the paper as performance. He had remembered that the matter had passed first through her body, her tray, her spoon. Christabel took the note and broke the seal. The apothecary's hand was cramped but clear. 3 weeks earlier, a bitter sleeping cordial had been purchased under the name Mr. Larkin by a servant wearing the Dower Lodge livery, with instructions that it should be strong enough for a person troubled by wakefulness and female nerves. Christabel set the note down slowly. Alice, behind her, whispered, 3 weeks. Before I arrived, Christabel said. Reynolds' face hardened. Then this was prepared before the house ever saw you. Not for me as a person, she said, for whoever became inconvenient in my place. That truth quieted everyone more thoroughly than a direct accusation would have done. It was not only Christabel they had meant to weaken, it was the office of any duchess who asked why cold had become profitable. Reynolds turned to Mr. Ellery. Can this stand? It can stand well enough to make dishonest people hurry. We still need the missing bottles if they can be found. But the pattern is no longer missed. It has walls. And if they move before tomorrow? Christabel asked. Mr. Ellery closed one ledger. Then we arrange the room so haste injures them. By late afternoon, the library had become a map of quiet crimes. The spoon in its locked case, the old West Wing ledger, the intercepted letters, the duplicate accounts, Dr. Hailwood's statement, and the apothecary note lay in ordered lines. Christabel had read until the letters swam and pride became less helpful than air. Reynolds saw the moment her breath shortened. He did not step in front of the solicitor. He did not send everyone out. He came near enough for her to hear him, and no nearer. Christabel, may I ask you to walk to the corridor window with me? She looked up. Is that concern or strategy? Both. The room is close, and if I say you need air before everyone, you will be angry with me. Accurate. If I ask whether you will allow me to accompany you to air, you may still be angry, but with better cause if I deserve it. Mr. Ellery suddenly became very interested in tying a ribbon around the ledger stack. Christabel rose. Then I will allow it. Alice followed at a proper distance. The corridor outside the library held the cooler scent of stone after rain. Halfway to the window seat, overlooking the terrace, Christabel's breath caught. She stopped one step too late. Reynolds stopped with her, every line of him controlled by the effort not to take over. May I steady you? He asked quietly. She looked at his offered arm, then at the hand hovering near her elbow. The memory of the embrace that morning moved through her, careful and brief, that had not mended everything. It had changed what help could mean. Yes, she said, only to the window seat. He supported her elbow lightly, just enough to guide balance and not enough to decide her path. When she reached the seat, he released her before she had to ask. Outside, gardeners had cleared the terrace path of weeds, revealing stained stone beneath. Last night, he said, I thought of sending you to London. She turned her face toward him, without asking. At first, he did not soften the confession. Then I opened my mother's ledger and understood that safety without choice is only a prettier locked room. The words settled between them. And now I ask, if you wish to go to London with Alice and Dr. Hailwood's instructions, I will arrange it. If you wish to remain upstairs while I confront Sir Neville, I will not call it weakness. If you wish to stand in the room yourself, I will stand beside you, and not before you, unless you ask it. Christabel looked down at the keys at her waist. They felt heavy again, but no longer like proof she must never bend. You are giving me choices. Late. Yes, but truly. She looked toward the terrace where the path had begun to show its shape under mud and moss. "I will not go to London. I will not hide upstairs. I will stand in the room." His fear was visible for one unguarded instant. Then he mastered it without making it hers. "Then we prepare truth so the room cannot escape it." She almost smiled. "That was nearly my line. I am learning from the better mind." It was too tender for the corridor, and not tender enough to frighten her. She let it remain. "I am not glass, Reynold." "No." His voice lowered. "You are the first place this house became warm." The answer reached her before she had prepared any defense. For one foolish second, she wanted to lean into his arm again, not from weakness, but because choosing warmth had begun to feel less like danger. Instead, she looked back toward the library. "Then do not let them turn warmth into evidence against me. Never again." They returned to find Mr. Ellery standing over a fresh note delivered without seal, his expression sharpened by satisfaction rather than alarm. "It was left with the porter," he said. Reynold opened it beside Christabel, so they read together. The hand was slanted, hurried, and unfamiliar. "Ask the Duchess why she begged Sir Neville to hide her condition if she now claims he silenced her. Tomorrow, everyone will hear her own words." Alice went pale. "Doctor," Hailwood swore under his breath, then apologized to the room. Christabel felt the corridor's hard-won air leave her lungs, but Reynold's sleeve was near. He did not move until she chose. She placed her fingers upon his arm openly, steadying herself before all of them. "A forged letter," she said. "Yes," Reynold answered. Mr. Ellery folded the note with unnerving calm. "Falls is arrogant. It copies what it admires and misses what it fears." Christabel looked at her true letters, the altered accounts, the spoon under glass, and the keys at her waist. "Then tomorrow," she said, "we let it speak until everyone hears the lie in its voice." The forged letter arrived before breakfast, folded with the confidence of a lie that had been invited to dine. Mr. Tebb carried it into the library on a salver, his face so carefully blank that Christabel knew he had already guessed its nature. Reynold stood at the long table with Mr. Ellery, Dr. Hailwood, and the ordered ranks of evidence between them. The spoon remained beneath the locked, glass-topped case, grey stain visible through the pane. Beside it lay the West Wing ledger, the intercepted letters, the apothecary note, and the duplicate accounts. Christabel sat nearest the morning light because Mr. Ellery had placed her there without saying why. He understood that a witness must be able to see and be seen. "Addressed to Sir Neville Brant, Your Grace," Mr. Tebb said, "left with the porter at first light by a boy who would not give his name." Reynold looked to Christabel before touching it. She inclined her head. "Open it." He broke the seal and unfolded the paper. His expression did not change at once. That frightened her more than anger would have done. "Read it aloud," she said. "Not all of it," he answered. "Yes, all of it. I would rather hear a stolen voice in a room that knows me than wait for strangers to applaud it." Reynold met her eyes, then obeyed. The letter claimed to be from Christabel to Sir Neville. It thanked him for concealing nervous irregularities, begged him to prevent the Duke from learning how often she imagined household dangers, and confessed that her poor constitution made her unfit for domestic authority. The phrases were clever enough to wound and foolish enough to reveal their maker. They copied fatigue, but not dignity. They imitated her hand, but not her mind. When Reynold finished, Alice had both hands pressed against her apron. Dr. Hailwood looked ready to denounce the paper as one might denounce a bad fever. Mr. Ellery only adjusted his spectacles. "A vain forgery," he said. "That is fortunate." Christabel looked at the page. It uses my words. Pieces of them, Mr. Ellery said. Copied from the true letters Sir Neville intercepted. Reynald took one of those letters and placed it beside the false one. The capital C is wrong. Mr. Ellery's brows lifted. Your Grace, Reynald pointed, Christabel's capital C begins high and narrows on the lower curve when she is tired. This one begins low every time, as if the writer watched only the shape and not the strain. The room went still. Christabel looked at him before she could prevent it. He did not look proud of the knowledge. He looked grieved by how late he had earned it. I know your hand, he said quietly. Now. The single word mattered because it did not pretend he had always known. Christabel felt something in her chest loosen, painfully and not enough. Mr. Ellery set 3 true letters in order. The Duke is correct. The pressure is wrong. The copied capitals are too careful. The fatigue pattern is absent. Whoever wrote this had access to your letters, your Grace, but not to the body that paid for them. Dr. Hailwood gave a short, grim sound, an ugly sort of evidence. Most useful evidence is ugly before it becomes just, Mr. Ellery said. He turned to Mr. Tebb. You told me last night that you saw a Kerslake footman near the Blue Passage after the chapel gathering. Mr. Tebb straightened. I did, sir. I did not understand it then. Find him before dinner if he is still in the village or at the Dower Lodge stables. Take Jenkins with you so the man knows this is not a private threat. If he carried a packet, note who gave it to him, where he placed it, and whether he knew what was inside. Do not frighten him into silence. Make him more afraid of being used. Mr. Tebb bowed. At once. Christabel watched the butler leave and understood the new shape of the day. The battle would not wait for evening. It had already begun moving through servants' passages, stable yards, folded linen, copied handwriting, and polite invitations. She rose too quickly. The room tightened around her, but Reynald did not move until she found the table edge. Air, she said, not retreat. Of course. She walked into the corridor alone for the first 10 steps, because she needed to prove that the forged letter had not taken her legs with her name. Rain silvered the long windows. The house smelled of beeswax, coal smoke, and papers newly disturbed after years of obedience. At the turn near the Blue Passage, Lady Amicia Kerslake waited, as if she had been painted there by malice and good taste. Her gown was pearl grey, her gloves immaculate, her smile tender. Dear Duchess, you look exhausted. Then your news is stale. Lady Amicia lowered her voice. I know what is planned for tonight. Sir Neville wishes to be severe. I don't. There is still a gentler path. Gentleness has become very busy in this house. Go to Bath, Lady Amicia said. For your health. Society will call it wise. The Duke will call it considerate. Norbury will be spared open embarrassment. And in time, people will remember you as a brave young woman who tried too much too soon. Christabel rested one hand against the window frame. She would not give Lady Amicia the satisfaction of seeing her reach for a chair. And you? I? How shall people remember you? A faint colour touched the other woman's cheek, as someone who understood the house before you arrived. No, as someone who mistook absence for invitation. The softness left Lady Amicia's eyes. You think being chosen once makes you secure? No. I think refusing to vanish makes me difficult. Difficult wives are not loved for long. The words found their mark because they were aimed at the part of Christabel that had stood in an empty entrance hall while carriage wheels carried her husband away. Pain moved through her. She did not deny it. Denial would have made the wound Amicia's property. If love depends upon my disappearance, she said, then it deserves to go hungry. Footsteps sounded behind them. Reynald came into the passage and stopped at once, not close enough to take over. His gaze moved from Lady Amicia's face to Christabel's hand against the window frame. "Did Lady Amicia upset you?" he asked Christabel, not Amicia. The question unsettled the rival more than any reprimand could have done. Christabel let one breath pass. She clarified the cost of leaving. "I decline to pay it." Reynald turned then. "Lady Amicia, you will attend dinner tonight only because truth benefits from witnesses." "How gallant!" "No, gallantry flatters. This will not." Lady Amicia's mouth tightened. "You speak as though I have been tried already." "No," Christabel said. "We speak as though you have been heard." After she withdrew, her skirts whispering defeat into the corridor, the rain against the glass seemed louder. Christabel's breath, which she had controlled through pride, began to fail in earnest. Reynald saw and offered his hand, palm open, without stepping closer. "May I stand with you a moment?" The question was simple. It should not have been able to move her. Yet the forged letter had stolen her voice. Lady Amicia had offered her a graceful erasure, and this man, who had once left rather than hear need, now waited for her answer in a passage where no audience could reward him for restraint. Christabel placed her hand in his. Yes. His fingers closed gently around hers. They stood together by the rain-streaked window while her breathing eased. He did not tell her to sit. He did not say she was brave, as if bravery solved pain. His thumb remained still against her glove, steady rather than soothing. "There is something I would say," he said after a while, "but not before tonight." "Why?" "Because if I say it before the room knows the truth, it may sound like a plea for you to trust me when you have not yet been vindicated." She looked at him. His face held more feeling than he allowed his voice. "Is it another apology?" "No," the answer was quiet, "though I will owe those longer than any sweeter words." Her heart gave one slow, dangerous beat. She looked back to the window before hope could become visible. "Then keep it until truth has room." "I will." Their hands remained joined until her breath settled fully. Then she released him first, and he let her. By early evening, Norbury Hall filled again. Carriages rolled up the drive. County neighbours stepped under the portico with curiosity sharpened by gossip. Tenants admitted by Reynald's order entered through the side hall, subdued but watchful. Servants moved along the dining-room walls with faces disciplined into formality. Mr. Ellery returned from the stable-yard just before the first bell, mud on his shoes and satisfaction in his eyes. Mr. Tebb followed, carrying a folded statement. "The Kerslake footman has answered," the solicitor murmured. He thought he carried linen and a note. He did not know there was a spoon. Christabel closed her hand once around the keys at her waist. Across the hall, Sir Neville Brant entered with Lady Amicia at his side, and the forged letter held in his leather portfolio like a blade wrapped in silk. Reynald stood beside Christabel, not before her. The dining-room doors opened, and every candle inside seemed to wait for someone to lie first. The dining-room at Norbury Hall had been built for ceremony, but that night it became something more dangerous than a court. No judge sat above the company. No barrister rose in wig and gown. Yet every candle along the long table burned over faces that understood reputation could ruin a woman faster than law could rescue her. County neighbours occupied the chairs nearest the hearth. Tenants stood respectfully behind the carved screen Reynald had ordered moved from the west passage, visible enough to witness, sheltered enough not to be mocked for standing among their betters. Servants waited along the sideboard with trained stillness. Mr. Ellery had arranged his document cases on a small table near Christabel's chair. Dr. Halewood stood beside him, brown coat severe against the polished room. Under the locked glass-topped case, the silver medicine spoon lay with its faint grey stain turned upward, a little dull moon beneath the candlelight. Beside it rested the West Wing medicine ledger, Christabel's true letters, the forged account page, the apothecary note, and the folded statement from the Kerslake footman. Sir Neville Brant entered the room with the calm of a man who believed order belonged to him, because disorder had always been made to wear another person's face. Lady Amicia Kerslake followed, lovely and pale, her smile offered first to society, then to Reynolds, then to Christabel, as if pity still expected a curtsy. Christabel sat with the keys at her waist and her hands folded over one another. Her lungs had been troublesome since afternoon. Her body wished to bargain. Her pride would not let it negotiate in public. Reynolds stood at her right, not before her. That mattered. He had asked once, in the passage before the doors opened, "Do you want me beside you?" And she had answered, "Yes, beside." He had understood the distinction. Sir Neville waited until the servants had poured the first wine, and the room had settled into the uncomfortable silence of people pretending dinner could still happen. Then he rose. "Your Graces, ladies, gentlemen, neighbours of Norbury, I regret that circumstances require candour." Mr. Ellery murmured, "They so often regret candour only after preparing it." Christabel did not smile. Sir Neville opened his leather portfolio. "Her Grace's recent efforts, though no doubt well-intentioned, have led to irregularities of household expenditure, disturbance among servants, accusations against faithful retainers, and unfortunate confusion regarding her own medical condition. I have here a letter written in Her Grace's hand, sent to me in confidence, begging that I conceal certain nervous irregularities from His Grace until she could regain composure." A sound moved through the guests. Lady Amicia lowered her eyes beautifully. "It pains us all." "Does it?" Christabel asked. Her voice was not loud, yet it reached the end of the table. Sir Neville looked toward her with practiced sadness. "Your Grace, I would spare you the distress of hearing private fears made public. You made them public when they suited you." Reynolds' hand remained at his side. He did not reach for her. She had not asked. Christabel stood. The room rose in scattered confusion. "Please sit," she said. "I am accused of weakness. Let me not waste what little strength I have on your manners." Chairs settled. One woman near the hearth gave a small shocked breath. Christabel looked at Sir Neville. "Read your letter." He hesitated just enough. Then he read. The forged voice asked him to hide her nervous imaginings. It claimed she had misread ordinary economies as neglect. It called Dr. Halewood's caution an indulgence of her fears. It begged that household keys be managed by wiser hands until her poor constitution improved. Christabel let every line be heard. Shame had once made her letters private. Now truth required witnesses. When Sir Neville lowered the page, she asked, "If I was too weak to rule this house, why did every cruelty require me to be silenced first?" The question struck the room with more force than anger. Mrs. Glover's eyes filled. Nell Sowerby, half hidden near the sideboard, pressed her lips together. Christabel turned to Mr. Ellery. "Sir, begin with the hand." Mr. Ellery stepped forward. "This letter imitates Her Grace's script from 3 intercepted letters found in Sir Neville's correspondence drawer. It fails in pressure, capital formation, and fatigue pattern. Here are the originals." He laid them out. "These true letters were opened before His Grace received them. On them Sir Neville wrote, "Exaggerated feminine alarm. Hysterical suspicion. Useful if needed." Reynold read the phrases aloud himself, each one clean and merciless. Sir Neville said, "Private notes, harshly interpreted." "Private notes on stolen letters," Reynold replied. Mr. Ellery continued, "The forged account page used at the chapel repeats phrases from Sir Neville's own ledgers. Coal paid for, but not delivered. Wages recorded as paid yet withheld. Chapel curtains recorded as mended while still rotten. Widow Arkwright's roof charged as inspected before any mason went." Mrs. Pike stepped forward only when Christabel nodded. "Kitchen fire was kept near out all winter, Your Grace. Coal was said to be scarce." Nell's voice came next, thin but clear. "Her Grace gave me wool because I was cold." Lady Amicia gave a brittle laugh. "Are we to decide ducal matters by servant stockings and a spoon?" Christabel looked at her. "You ruined yourself when you believed neither could matter." Dr. Hailwood placed his statement beside the spoon. "The residue preserved on Her Grace's measuring spoon does not match Dr. Hargreaves' instructions." The tonic bottles vanished after inquiry. The apothecary confirms a bitter sleeping cordial was purchased under a false name by a servant in Dower Lodge livery before Her Grace arrived. Sir Neville's hand tightened around the portfolio. "This is conjecture arranged to flatter a narrative." "Then let us add movement," Mr. Ellery said. "Mr. Tebb saw a Kerslake footman near the Blue Passage after the chapel scandal. That footman has given a statement this evening. He carried a folded linen packet from the Dower Lodge entrance to a medical bag, left briefly in the lower hall. He says he was told it contained a note and a lady's handkerchief." Lady Amicia went perfectly still. Sir Neville turned too quickly. "You said no one saw him." The words left his mouth before rank could recall them. Silence fell. It was not listening silence now, it was verdict. Lady Amicia's face lost colour beneath powder. "I said no such thing." Sir Neville stared at her, then at the room, and saw that his mistake had already closed around him. Reynold stepped forward. "Sir Neville Brant, you are removed from all Norbury accounts and trustee duties. Mr. Ellery will forward these ledgers to my London solicitor and to the magistrate for such proceedings as fraud, forgery, and conspiracy permit. You will leave Norbury Hall tonight under no authority but observation." Sir Neville's mask cracked at last. "You would disgrace the estate for a sickly bride." Reynold's voice lowered. "No, I disgraced it when I let another man decide whether my wife could be heard." He turned to the room, and Christabel felt the shift before he spoke. "This was not defence. This was confession. I brought the Duchess of Norbury to this house, and left her in its cold. I trusted convenience over character. I mistook absence for restraint. I gave silence room to work, and Sir Neville used the room I gave him. Let every person here know this plainly. Christabel Fane restored warmth where I permitted neglect. She stood where I fled. She listened where this house had learned to dismiss. If Norbury has a duchess worthy of honour, it is not because I protected her soon enough. It is because she remained worthy while I learned how late a man can be. Christabel could not look away. The room seemed to breathe with her for one brief, impossible moment. Lady Amicia rose. This is sentiment. No, Christabel said. This is consequence. Mr. Ellery gathered the forged letter and placed it under weight. Lady Amicia Kerslake's part in the footman's errand and the distribution of gossip will be known to every family represented here. Society may decide what it makes of a lady who mistook cruelty for refinement. No one spoke in her defence. That was her sentence, and she understood it more bitterly than law. Later, after guests had gone in murmuring clusters, after Sir Neville had been escorted to the Dower Lodge under Reynolds's steward and Mr. Tebb had locked the document cases away, Christabel stepped onto the terrace for air. Rain had stopped. The stones smelled clean and dark. Reynolds followed no closer than the doorway. "May I come out?" he asked. "Yes." He stood beside her beneath the shallow shelter of the wall. For a while neither spoke. Then he said, "You are free, Christabel. If you wish London, I will arrange London. If you wish Bath, a separate establishment, Norbury without me, or any life that requires me to step aside. I will not call it abandonment when it is your choice." She turned to him. Candlelight from the dining room touched one side of his face, leaving the other in shadow. "You would give me your house. It was never made home by being mine." She lifted her hand first and touched his cheek. He went still beneath her glove. "I love you, Reynolds, and I choose to stay where I am loved, not merely needed." His breath changed. For the first time since she had known him, control did not arrive quickly enough to hide feeling. "I love you, Christabel, not because you made my house beautiful, but because you taught me what it means to stay." He waited. Even then, he waited. She rose slightly, and he bent to meet her. Their kiss was gentle, brief and fully chosen, less a claim than a promise, finally brave enough to be spoken without words. When it ended, his forehead rested near hers, but not against it, until she leaned the smallest degree closer. "That still doesn't mend everything," she whispered. "No," he said, "but I will mend what I can every day you allow me." She took his hand. Together they returned to the dining room, where the silver spoon lay under glass beside the true letters, no longer a secret, no longer a shame, but the small, stained witness that had taught a great house to listen. By the first week of October, Norbury Hall had ceased pretending that silence was the same as peace. It did not transform overnight, and Christabel was grateful for that, because sudden miracles belonged to stories told by people who had never had to mend a roof, balance a coal account, or teach a wounded house to trust its own doors. The kitchen fires burned honestly now, entered in the household book by weight and day. Mrs. Pike no longer cut bread so thin that hunger could see through it. Nell Sowerby moved through the scullery, with grey wool stockings on her feet, and a little more mischief in her curtsy, though she still went solemn when Christabel passed, as if gratitude were too large to carry casually. Widow Arkwright's roof had been repaired before the first autumn storm. The under-gardener had received his arrears. The chapel curtains, washed and mended in spring, had been replaced by plain new cloth in September, not grand enough to boast, and not cheap enough to insult the room. Every improvement appeared, twice, once in the house and once in the accounts. Because Christabel had learned that kindness without records could be stolen, and records without kindness could become cruelty, Sir Neville Brant no longer crossed the threshold of Norbury Hall. His trustee authority had been revoked within days of the dinner. His access to rents and repair disbursements ended, and Mr. Ellery's London office had placed the ledgers, forged receipts, and copied correspondence before the proper men for proceedings that would take longer than county gossip wished to wait. Debt had begun to find him faster than courtesy could cover him. Lady Amicia Kerslake had not been dragged into public disgrace by any scene dramatic enough for a caricature. Her punishment was quieter and sharper. Invitations failed to arrive. Mothers remembered sudden illnesses when she called. The rector's wife looked through her at the milliners. The families who had once treated her as a future Duchess of Norbury now spoke of her in careful past tense. Society, which she had trusted as a weapon, had turned itself into a closed door. Christabel did not celebrate either fall. Triumph, she discovered, could become another kind of appetite if fed too long. She preferred repair. Her own health improved slowly, unevenly, and without the flattery of pretending illness had been only an obstacle for love to conquer. There were mornings when she woke strong enough to cross the terrace before breakfast, and afternoons when the stairs left her breathless enough that Alice said nothing at all, which was how Christabel knew the maid was most worried. Dr. Hailwood called every fortnight and continued to disapprove of excessive paperwork, damp corridors, and noblemen who hovered in doorways with faces too anxious for usefulness. Reynolds listened to those reports, standing beside Christabel rather than over her chair. Sometimes he asked what she chose before he asked what the doctor advised. And those were the moments that changed the house more deeply than new curtains. On a bright, cool afternoon, he unlocked the west wing with Christabel beside him and did not once pretend the task was merely architectural. Dust had been swept from the runner. Windows had been opened. Eleanor Fane's portrait stood uncovered at last, her painted eyes no longer forced to watch through half-drawn cloth. In the sitting room where Reynolds had read the ledger through the night, a small fire burned cleanly beneath a chimney newly cleared. Christabel stood near the mantel with the household keys at her waist, one hand resting lightly on the chair back until her breathing settled. Reynolds remained at the door until she looked back. "You may come in," she said. "It's your house too, after all." His smile was brief and unguarded. "I have been trying to earn that sentence. Do not grow vain. You have earned the right to hear it once." He entered and stopped before his mother's portrait. For a moment, grief took the proud lines from his face and left him simply a son. Christabel came to stand beside him, not touching, not yet. "She should not remain a warning only," she said. "No," his voice was low. "Nor a shrine. A room, then." She looked around at the opened windows, the pale walls, the hearth, the place where dust had held years in place. Music in winter, reading when the weather is too wet. A couch for any lady in this house who needs rest without being hidden. Reynolds looked at her. "Any lady, any woman," Christabel said, correcting herself. "Duchess, maid, cook, guest, widow, child, if one ever visits with muddy shoes and terrible manners. No one in this wing is to be made easier to mourn than to believe." He closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, the old coldness was not gone from him entirely. It had become something better, a discipline turned toward care. "I love you," he said. The words were quiet enough for the room and clear enough for the servants passing beyond the open door to hear. They were not performance. That made them braver. Christabel felt heat rise beneath her skin and did not turn away from it. "I love you too, Reynolds." Mrs. Glover, visible in the passage with a folded cloth in her hands, suddenly found the floor in need of intense study. Mr. Tebb coughed once with the dignity of a man whose eyes had betrayed him. Reynolds did not apologize for being heard. Neither did Christabel. Later that week, county callers came to Norbury Hall expecting the careful politeness due after scandal and found instead a duchess seated in the drawing room with a count's tea and authority all within reach. Christabel received them in a deep blue gown, with the keys at her waist and no shawl arranged to make illness decorative. Reynolds greeted the first arrivals, spoke courteously for 10 minutes, then excused himself to the steward's room so plainly that no one could mistake the meaning. Her authority did not depend on his shadow. Lady Wickham asked about the chapel curtains. Mrs. Alderley inquired after Dr. Hailwood with an interest, a shade too sharp to be kindness. Christabel answered both, then asked after their tenants' winter coal arrangements with such serene precision that by the time the tea cooled, every woman in the room understood that frailty and governance were not opposites at Norbury Hall. That evening, when the last carriage had left and the first lamps were being carried through the lower passages, Reynold brought the locked glass case from the library. Inside lay the silver medicine spoon, its faint grey stain preserved in the bowl, no longer bright, no longer clean, and no longer shameful. Mr. Ellery had said it could be retained now that copies of statements and descriptions had been made. Christabel carried the old West Wing medicine ledger herself. They placed both objects inside a glass cabinet in the west sitting room, not hidden in a study and not displayed like a curiosity, but kept where anyone who knew the house could understand the vow. Beside them, Reynold set a small card written in his own hand. "Let no care in this house proceed without listening." Christabel read it once. "You resisted making it sound ducal. With difficulty. Good." He looked at the spoon through the glass. "I used to think listening meant hearing distress and deciding what to do with it. And now I think it means letting truth alter the listener." She turned to him. "That was nearly wise. I am becoming dangerous. Do not become insufferable. I will ask your permission first." She laughed then, a small sound that surprised them both because it did not break into coughing. Reynold's face changed at the sound, not with relief only, with wonder and with the restraint of a man who had learned not to seize even happiness too quickly. He looked down at her hand. "May I?" Christabel gave him her gloved fingers. He bent and kissed them, slowly enough to honor, gently enough to ask even after permission had been given. Before he released her, she turned her hand into his and squeezed once. His thumb stilled against her glove, receiving rather than claiming. Outside the west windows, the October dusk deepened over the terrace. Inside, Norbury Hall answered with lamps. Christabel insisted on lighting the first one in the entrance hall herself. Alice objected under her breath. Dr. Hailwood would have objected had he been there. Reynold merely carried the taper and waited while Christabel took it. The flame trembled at the end, small and gold. She touched it to the wick. Light opened across the same hall where she had once arrived in rain, unwelcomed, with a medicine case on her lap and a husband already preparing to leave. Now the portraits looked less like judges. The hearth was built. The doors were used. The keys at her waist were warm from her body. Reynold offered his hand without urgency. Christabel took it. They walked slowly, because she had no need to prove speed to anyone now. At the foot of the stairs, he looked toward the open west passage, the dining room beyond, the servants' hall glow below, and the woman beside him who had made truth costly enough to matter. "Now," he said softly, "I know why men come home." Christabel glanced at him, smiling with the dignity that had first unsettled him and the tenderness he had learned not to fear. "Then remember to deserve the door." He lifted her hand and held it against his heart. "Every day you allow me." Together they continued through the warm hall, past the lit rooms and opened passages, while behind them the stained silver spoon rested under glass beside the old ledger. No longer a sign that a sick woman had been dismissed, but proof that a listened-to woman could bring a house back to life. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.